The war beast had been fighting the cradle for 6 hours when they sent for the child. It hung in the restraint frame at the center of the conditioning pit, all 4 of its lower limbs locked in alloy cuffs the width of a man's chest, its 2 forelimbs pinned back against a spine of hydraulic rams. Every few seconds the whole apparatus screamed as the animal tested it again, a slow, deliberate surge of muscle under slate-gray plate, patient the way a tide is patient. It did not thrash like a cornered thing. It leaned. It had learned, over 11 years, exactly how much the frame could give, and it took that much and held it, and waited to see if today the metal was tired. Handler Sesh watched the load meters climb into amber and thought, not for the first time, that they were all going to die in this room eventually, and that the paperwork would say otherwise. Dose 4 is not holding, Dr. Rill said from the observation gallery, her voice flat through the speaker grill. Cognitive suppression at 19% and falling. It's metabolizing faster than the model. It always metabolizes faster than the model, Sesh said. Note it and bring the ward. Sesh did not need to note it. 9 metabolized everything faster than the model. That was the first fact anyone learned about the last morrec, and the fact that had killed the careers of 4 program directors before the current one. You could put enough sedative in its blood to stop a freight hauler's heart, and the morrec would blink, slow, and then simply decide the drug was over. Its body obeyed it the way the frame did not. He keyed the intercom to the low wing. Send Nell down, pit 3. There was a pause, the kind of pause that meant the duty clerk was deciding whether to pretend he hadn't heard, and then a tired voice said, on her way. Above the pit, behind the armored glass, Overseer Vex arranged himself in the director's chair. Sesh felt the room change temperature when he arrived, the way it always did, the handlers straightening, the meters suddenly seeming louder. Vex was tall for a Thren, his chitin lacquered the deep bruise purple of high office, and he had come to the Harrow 11 months ago with a reputation for finishing programs other people had failed to finish. He did not look at the war beast. He looked at the load meters, and at the amber climbing in them, and he laced his long fingers together and said nothing, which was worse than anything he could have said. The morrec surged again. The frame shrieked. A rivet the size of Sesh's thumb sheared off somewhere in the housing and rang off the far wall, and every handler in the pit flinched except the 2 Grut guards at the blast door, who were paid too much to flinch. Then the small door at the base of the pit cycled open, and the child walked in, and the room let out a breath it had been holding for 6 hours. She was 11, or near it. No one at the Harrow had ever bothered to write it down. She was small even for a human, narrow through the shoulders. With dark hair she cut herself with shears from the cleaning locker, and a pale, plain, unremarkable face that no one in the galaxy would have looked at twice. She wore the gray coverall they issued to the low wing, 2 sizes too big, the cuffs rolled and the knees worn through, and she carried a plastic pail of the pit's cleaning solvent because she had been mopping the intake corridor when the call came, and she did not know how to walk anywhere without something in her hands. She stopped just inside the door. She looked at the war beast hanging in its frame, at the amber meters, at the sheared rivet on the floor. She did not look up at the gallery. You started without me again, she said. Ward, Dr. Rill's voice said from above, patient and cold, approach the subject and comment. Do not touch the frame. Nell set the pail down by the wall, unhurried. She crossed the pit floor toward the thing that had killed 19 handlers before she was born, and the closer she came the stiller it grew, and by the time she stood beneath its vast lowered head the last morrec in the known galaxy had stopped fighting the cradle entirely and hung slack in its restraints, watching her come with 2 amber eyes the size of dinner plates. Hello, Gray, she said. Sesh had watched this happen perhaps 200 times, and it had never once stopped putting a cold finger down the seam of his shell. She did not do anything. That was the part the models could not hold. She did not have a signal, a scent marker, a subsonic call, a conditioning key. The program had spent 4 years and an obscene budget looking for the mechanism and had found nothing, because there was nothing to find. She walked up to the animal and stood where its breath moved her hair, and she said hello to it, and the apex predator of a burned world folded itself down around her like a hand closing over a coal. Suppression rising, Dr. Rill reported. 2940, 51 heart rate settling. A pause. It's calm. It's not calm, Nell said without turning around. It's tired. You've had it in the frame since third shift. Its shoulders cramping, the back left. You've got the cuff too high. In the gallery, Overseer Vex spoke for the first time. His voice was soft and precise, and it carried without the grill needing to lift it. Lower the cuff. Overseer protocol requires. Lower the cuff, doctor. The ward has been correct about the animal's musculature 100% of the time, and your model has been correct 60. Lower it. The cuff dropped 4 centimeters with a pneumatic sigh. In the frame, the morrec's great head tilted, and a sound came out of it. Not a growl, not the ratcheting shriek it made at the handlers, but a low, subsonic hum that Sesh felt in the fluid behind his eyes more than heard. The child called it the bell. She had named it that when she was 6. On the first day someone had shoved her into the pit as a last resort, and the name had stuck the way things stick when there is no one to correct a child. There, Nell said. She reached up. She had to stand on her toes and laid one small flat hand against the great gray jaw, on the seam between 2 plates where the hide was soft, and the war beast closed its eyes. Sesh looked up at the gallery without meaning to. He saw Overseer Vex leaning forward now, both hands flat on the console rail, watching the child's hand on the beast's jaw with an expression Sesh had never seen on him before and did not like. It was not fear. Vex did not fear the animal. Vex did not, as far as Sesh could tell, fear anything. It was hunger. It was the look of a man who has spent 11 months trying to open a lock, and has just watched a child pull a key out of her pocket without knowing she carried it. Dr. Rill, Vex said quietly, convene the review board. I want the terminal protocol on the schedule. Below, the child hummed 4 low notes to the war beast, a scrap of a lullaby, the same 4 notes she always used, a tune so old and worn Sesh had stopped hearing it as music years ago, and the last morrec answered her with the bell, and neither of them heard the man in the gallery decide their future. The Harrow had not always been a place for breaking beasts. It had been a mineral station once, back when Senate's crust was worth the shipping, a squat gray drum of a facility bolted to the dark side of a moon that never turned its face to its sun. When the ore ran thin, the Concord had bought the bones of it cheap and filled its empty galleries with cages, because a station on the wrong side of a dead moon was exactly the kind of place where you did the work no council wanted to watch you do. Sesh had come here 9 years ago as a junior handler, because it was the only berth that would take a thren with his family's debt, and he had told himself, the way everyone told themselves, that he would not stay. The morrec had already been there 4 years by then. It had come in a stasis hauler with a manifest that called it salvage, biological, apex, single specimen, and a note in the margin in a clerk's cramped hand that read last confirmed. The species had a homeworld once. Sesh had looked it up in the early years when he still looked things up. A wet green world called Asan on the old star charts, 3 jumps coreward, that the Concord's records now listed as pacified, a word the Concord used the way other people use the word empty. There were no morrec on Asan anymore. There were no morrec anywhere anymore, except the one hanging in Pit 3, and whatever the cold wing held, which Sesh was not cleared to know about and had trained himself not to wonder. The program's purpose was simple, and had never once been written down in plain words. A morrec was the finest killing instrument the galaxy had ever grown, 6 limbs, plate you needed a cutting charge to breach, a nervous system that shrugged off shock and toxin and pain, and a mind that hunted in 3 dimensions and remembered faces for decades. An army that could field morrec would not need to field much else. The trouble, the entire trouble, The trouble that had eaten 4 directors and a decade of budget was that a morrec could not be made to obey a stranger. It bonded in the wild, the old survey notes said so, in the careful passive voice of people describing something they had exterminated. It bonded for life, to one keeper, and it would die for that keeper and kill for that keeper, and take instruction from that keeper and from no one else in the universe. And the keepers were gone. The conquered had made very sure the keepers were gone. So the hero existed to solve that problem the way the conquered solved every problem, chemically, by force, on schedule. If a morrec would only obey a bond, then the program would build a bond it could pour out of a vial, would find the switch in the animal's brain that said this one is mine, and flip it toward a handler of the conquered's choosing, and then flip it again for the next buyer, and the next. 4 years of conditioning. 4 years of compounds with clean corporate names. 4 years of the frame and the pit and the amber meters and the animal that metabolized everything faster than the model and obeyed no one. No one but the child. Sesh had been on shift the day they found her, though at the time no one understood they had found anything. She had been 3, maybe 4, a laborer's daughter from the Orcrew barracks in the lower drum, one of the human families the conquered kept on the cheap end of the station for the work too fine or too filthy for machines. Her mother had died, an accident in the sorting galleries, the kind the station logged and forgot, and there had been no one to take the child, and rather than pay to ship a human orphan 3 jumps to a relief world, the station had simply let her stay, absorbed her into the low wing the way a station absorbs everything eventually, and put a mop in her hands as soon as she was tall enough to hold one. She had wandered into the beast levels, because no one had thought to tell a 4-year-old not to. And the morrec, which had by then put 2 handlers in the medical bay, and was scheduled for what the program politely called a compliance escalation, had gone to the bars of its cage when the child came down the gantry, and had made the sound Sesh would later learn the girl called the bell, and had lain down. They had tried in the years since to do without her. Vex's 3 predecessors had each, in turn, decided that a program built on the accident of one human child was no program at all, and had each, in turn, tried to break the morrec to a proper handler and a proper protocol. Each had failed. Each failure had a name and a date and a medical file. And each time, when the frame screamed and the meters climbed and the animal began, patiently, to take the room apart, someone had sent down to the low wing for the ward, because the alternative was worse. They had never once told her why it worked. Sesh was not sure they knew. He was not sure, watching her walk out of the pit that evening with her solvent pail swinging from one hand and the load meters going green behind her, that he wanted to be in the room on the day they found out. Nell mopped the intake corridor after, because it still needed doing. The corridor ran the length of the beast levels, a long gray throat of stamped plating with the pens opening off it on both sides, and it was hers to keep, hers because no one else would take it, because the smell got into your shell and the sounds got into your sleep, and because a human girl who could not be shipped anywhere was cheaper than a machine and complained less. She worked it end to end twice a shift with the solvent that stripped the shine off her fingertips, and she talked, quietly, to the things behind the bars, because they were the only company she had that did not look at her the way the handlers did. Most of the pens were empty now. There had been more, once, she remembered more, the year she was small, a whole level of low grunting things the program had used to test its compounds before it dared spend them on the morrec. Cold, the handler said when she asked, which was a word she had learned early meant do not ask again. Now the level was mostly dark, most of the pens holding nothing but their own echoes, and only the far end lived. The med pen, where they kept the sick ones, the observation cells, and at the very end behind a blast door she was not permitted through and had never once seen open, the cold wing. She stopped at the blast door, the way she always did, and put her hand flat against the cold metal, the way she always did, and felt nothing, the way she always did. Something behind that door made the bell sound too. Not Gray's, smaller, higher, more of them. She had heard it exactly twice in 7 years, both times at deep third shift when the station was quiet, a thin chorus of small hums leaking through the seals like water finding a crack. She had never told anyone she heard it. She had learned in the low wing that the things you told the handlers became things the handlers took away. Ward, a shadow at the corridor's mouth. Sesh, the handler with the cracked left mandible, the one who brought her ration bars sometimes when the clerk forgot her on the list. He was not a kind alien exactly. Nell had never met a kind alien and had stopped expecting to, but he was a tired one, and tired was close enough to kind that she had learned to tell them apart. You should eat and sleep. There's a review tomorrow. They'll want you sharp. A review of what? Sesh hesitated. She watched him hesitate, and she knew the shape of that hesitation the way she knew the shape of the blast door, and something in her went cold and still. The terminal protocol, he said finally, because she would find out anyway and because he was too tired to lie to a child at the end of a 6-hour shift. The last one, the last compound in the program. They've been building toward it for years. It's meant to be the one that finishes the work, fixes the bond. Makes him take a proper handler. He looked away. The overseer's putting it on the schedule. Nell took her hand off the blast door. It won't work, she said. Nell. Nothing they put in him works, you know that. He just decides it's over and it's over. He's stronger than all of it. She picked her pail back up and her small plain face had gone flat and careful, the face she used with handlers, the face that gave nothing back. It won't work. They think this one will, Sesh said gently. They've built it differently. It's not meant to force him. It's meant to, he stopped, because he did not entirely understand the theory himself, and because the parts he did understand he did not want to say out loud in a corridor to the one person in the station who loved the animal. It's meant to open the bond and point it somewhere new, at a handler of their choosing. That's the whole program, Nell. That's what it was always for. She was quiet for a moment. The corridor hummed. Far down at the cold end, behind the blast door, something small made a sound and stopped. Point it where, she said. Sesh didn't answer. Point it where, Sesh? She was not a loud child. She had never once in 7 years raised her voice in the low wing. Loud children got noticed, and getting noticed was how you got shipped or culled. But there was something in the flat quiet of it now that made the old handler's mandibles click shut. They don't know yet, he said, which was true, and was the worst thing he could have said, and he saw her understand both of those things at once. It's a compound, Nell. It doesn't choose. Whoever's closest whoever the animal is keyed to when it takes hold, that's who it points at. That's the theory. And who's closest to Gray, Nell said, when they put him in the frame? The corridor hummed. Neither of them said it. She turned and went back to her mopping, end to end, the long gray throat of the corridor, and Sesh stood at its mouth for a while, and watched the small human child clean the floor of a place built to break the last of a murdered species. And then he went to write a memo he already knew would change nothing. He was right about the memo. He was wrong about almost everything else, but he was right about the memo. The review board met in the gallery over pit 3, which was itself a kind of message. Whatever we decide, the animal is already beneath us. Sesh stood at the back where junior handlers stood, and watched Overseer Vex run the room the way a tide runs a shoreline without hurry, without raising his voice, wearing everyone down to the shape he wanted. Dr. Rill presented the compound. She had a name for it that Sesh forgot the moment he heard it, some clean 4-syllable thing off a corporate roster, but the handlers all called it what the low wing called it, which was the severance, because that was what it was for. 4 years of every other compound had tried to suppress the animal, to sedate it, to flood its blood until its will drowned. The severance did not try to drown the will. It tried to move it. The bond in a morrec is not a behavior, Rill told the board in the tone of a woman who had said this many times to people who did not want to hear it. It is not conditioning. We have proven that at great expense. It is a structure, a fixed recognition, laid down once and held for life. You cannot argue a morrec out of its keeper any more than you can argue it out of its own spine. Every director before the overseer tried to break the structure. The structure does not break. She let that sit. The severance does not break it. The severance makes it plastic. For a window, hours, our models say, perhaps a day, the recognition becomes writable. And in that window, whatever the animal fixes on, it will hold, for life. As if it had chosen it in the wild. And what does it fix on? Said one of the board. A gray-robed conquered auditor who had come up from the corps for the vote and clearly wished he had not. Proximity and prior salience, Rill said. The strongest existing associations, reinforced at the moment of administration. In practice, whoever the animal already knows and trusts, made permanent and made obedient. The auditor's eyes moved, without his head moving, to the low door at the base of the pit, the ward's door. Sesh saw him make the calculation. He saw the whole board make it, one after another, a little ripple of understanding going around the gallery. And he saw Overseer Vex sit back and let them make it, because Vex had built this meeting so that they would arrive at his conclusion believing it was their own. The ward, the auditor said. The ward is the strongest existing association by an order of magnitude, Rill agreed. It is, frankly, the only association. The animal tolerates handlers. It knows the child. Then the compound keys the animal to a human orphan. The auditor's mandibles clicked in distaste. That solves nothing. The Conquered did not fund 11 years of this station to sell an apex weapon leashed to a laborer's daughter who cannot be trusted to hold a mop bucket steady. No, Vex said. It was the first word he had spoken since the board convened, and the room turned to him the way iron turns to a magnet. No, he said again gently. It does not key to the child. That is the elegance of it, auditor, and I confess it is not mine, it is the doctor's, and it is very fine work. The compound does not fix the bond in place at the moment of administration. It opens the window. In that window the structure is writable, and in that window we write. He turned one long lacquered hand palm up and unveiling. We have spent 4 years failing to move the bond because we tried to move it against the animal's will from the outside. We stopped doing that. Instead, on the day of administration, the child calms the animal as she always does. The window opens. The animal is, for the first time in its life, open, trusting, plastic, keyed to affection rather than to threat. And in that state we introduce the new keeper's signature, overwhelmingly, continuously. We flood the window with the handler we have chosen in the one condition where the structure will accept a new mark. The child opens the door. Our handler walks through it. And when the window closes, the animal belongs to the Conquered, bonded, obedient for life, believing it chose us. The child has served her purpose. The animal never has to know she is gone. The gallery was silent. Sesh had heard a great many terrible things said calmly in the 9 years he had been at the Harrow. This was the one he would remember. It was not the cruelty of it. The Conquered's cruelty was a background radiation. You stopped registering it the way you stopped registering the hum of the drum. It was the tidiness. Vex had found a way to take the one true thing in the whole rotten station, the thing between the child and the beast, the only clean thing on the wrong side of a dead moon, and use it as a doorway, and then close the door. And the child, the auditor asked, not from mercy, from tidiness of his own. Reassigned, Vex said. The lower drum always needs hands. On her way. Someone laughed, low in the back of the gallery, and Sesh realized with a lurch that it was the duty clerk, that even the clerk found it funny, and he understood then that the memo in his pocket was worth nothing, that there was no one in the room and no one on the station and no 1-3 jumps in any direction who would spend a single credit to stop this, and that the only two who would try were an 11-year-old human and a war beast in a frame, and that they did not yet know what was coming. He voted with the rest of them. He would remember that too. He raised his hand with the rest of the board when the auditor called it, because a junior handler with family debt does not vote against an overseer and keep his berth, and because he told himself, in the old worn way, that his one vote changed nothing. The severance was approved 11-1. The one was the auditor, who abstained, not from conscience, but because he did not want his name on a novel procedure that might fail. The administration was scheduled for the following third shift. Vex wanted it done quietly, in the deep hours when the station slept and the drum was still. "One thing," Dr. Rill said, as the board rose. She had been quiet since her presentation, and Sesh had taken it for the ordinary quiet of a scientist who has won her argument. Now he saw it was something else. She was looking at her own data slate. The models assume the child is a null vector, an association, nothing more, a warm object the animal happens to trust. That's the assumption the whole window rests on. The compound floods the window, and our signature is the only structured thing in it, so ours is what the bond writes. "Yes," Vex said, with the faint impatience of a man being told a thing he already believed. "I would only note," Rill said slowly, "that we have never actually tested that assumption. We have never had a reason to ask what the child is chemically. She has always simply been there." She looked up. "If she is a null vector, the procedure is elegant. If she is not, if there is any structure in her, the animal is already reading that we have never measured. Then we are not opening an empty room and writing our name on the wall. We are opening a room that already has a name on the wall, and the compound does not care whose name it makes permanent." For a moment Sesh would swear to this later to himself, in the dark. For a moment Overseer Vex hesitated. Then he said, "She is a laborer's orphan, doctor. She is a mop and a pulse. Test her in the morning if it soothes you, but do not move my schedule." And he left, and the board filed out after him, and Dr. Rill stood alone in the gallery over the empty pit for a while, looking at her slate, and then she put in the order for the ward's blood panel, flagged routine, to be run whenever the lab had a spare hour. The lab did not have a spare hour that day, or the next. The panel sat in the queue behind the compound assays for the severance, which were, by the overseer's own order, priority 1. Sesh checked. He checked twice. Nell's blood sat unrun in a rack in the cold lab through the whole of the day before, a small sealed vial with a routine flag and a child's name on it, containing, though no one yet knew it, the answer to every question the harrow had ever asked. Nell spent the day before in the pit with Gray, because they let her, because a calm animal was easier to prepare than a fighting one, and they wanted him easy. They had taken him out of the frame. That alone told her something was wrong. They never took him out of the frame the day before a compound. They left him in it so he'd be too tired to fight the needle. Now he lay loose in the pit on the scored floor, all 6 limbs folded under him, his great gray bulk filling a third of the room, and she sat against his foreleg where the plate gave way to the softer hide of the joint, and she leaned her whole small weight into him, and he let her. "They're going to do something tomorrow," she told him. She kept her voice down. There were microphones in the pit. There were microphones everywhere. She had known that since she was old enough to know anything, but a low voice against a war beast's foreleg was as close to private as the harrow allowed. "Sesh told me. It's a bad one. The last one." The morrec breathed. His breath moved through him like weather. Against her back she felt the slow tidal swell of it, in and out, and under it, so low it was more pressure than sound. The bell, the note he made when she was close and he was not afraid. The note she had named when she was 6 because it was the only beautiful thing she had ever been given and she had wanted it to have a name. "I've been thinking," she said, "about running." She had not said this out loud before. She was not sure she had let herself think it in words before. The harrow was a drum bolted to a dead moon. There was nowhere to run to, no ship a low-wing ward could reach, no door in the whole station that would open for her hand. And there was Gray, who filled a third of a room, who could not be run with. You did not run with the last morrec in the galaxy. You did not fold an apex predator into a maintenance duct and smuggle it off a conquered station. I know, she said to the sound he made. I know we can't, I just wanted to say it, so somebody said it. The morrec turned his head. It was an enormous, slow movement, and it brought one amber eye down level with her, close enough that she could see her own small reflection curved in it, and the vertical slot of the pupil widening as it took her in. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since she was 4 years old and did not know to be afraid. Not the way the handlers looked at her, which was the way you look at a tool. Not the way the clerk looked at her, which was the way you look at a line item. The way, she thought, someone might look at you if they had been waiting a very long time for you to arrive. She had never had a word for that look. She was 11 and she had grown up in a drum on a dead moon, and no one had ever looked at her that way but this monster, this last murdered thing, this gray. And so she had never needed a word because it only came from one place, and the place had a name, and the name was enough. I'm not scared of tomorrow, she told him, which was a lie, and he made the bell sound low, as if to say he knew it was a lie and did not mind, and she pressed her face into the warm seam of his foreleg and stayed there a long time while the microphones listened and understood nothing. In the cold lab, in a rack, a small sealed vial waited its turn behind the priorities of important people. In the low wing, a duty clerk struck the ward's name from the labor roster for the day after tomorrow and typed, in the reassignment field, lower drum general, and thought no more about it. In the gallery, Dr. Rill ran her models one more time, and one more time they told her the procedure was elegant, and one more time she noticed that they only said so because she had told them the child was nothing, and she sat with that for a while, and then she went to sleep, because she had an early administration to prepare and there was, she told herself, nothing to be done at this hour anyway. And in Pit 3, in the deep quiet before third shift, the last morrec lay awake with the human child asleep against his foreleg, and made, so low that no instrument on the station was tuned to catch it, a sound that was not the bell, a different sound, a older one. The sound his kind had made, on a wet green world 3 jumps coreward, in the long generations before the Conquered came with its stasis haulers and its clean corporate words. The sound a morrec makes when its keeper is sleeping and unguarded and the dark is full of things. The sound that means I have you, nothing comes through me to reach you, sleep. He had made that sound over this child every night for 7 years. No one had ever asked why. They woke her in the dark and told her it was a calm day. That was the lie they had chosen, and Nell knew it was a lie the moment the clerk said it, because they had never once come to wake her. She woke herself. She had always woken herself, in the bunk slot in the low wing with the drum humming through the wall. But this morning there were 2 Grut guards at the mouth of her corridor, and a handler she didn't know holding a fresh coverall, a clean one, her size, and that frightened her more than the guards did. Nobody at the Harrow had ever given her a thing that fit. Calm day, the handler repeated, pleasant, empty. Just you and the animal like always. The overseer wants him relaxed while the medical team runs some routine work. You'll sit with him. That's all. That's all, Nell said. That's all. She put on the coverall that fit. She did not argue. She had learned in the low wing that arguing was how you told them what you knew, and she did not want them to know what she knew, which was that this was the day Sesh had warned her about, the terminal protocol, the last compound, the one that would open Gray up and point him somewhere new. She had lain awake half the night against his foreleg working it through in her small, methodical way, and she had arrived, some hours before the clerk came, at a decision she did not have a plan for and could not have explained to anyone, that she would not let them do it, and that she did not know how, and that not knowing how did not change the first part. They walked her down through the beast levels in the dark hours. The pens went by empty on either side. At the cold end the blast door was shut as always, and as always she looked at it, and this time something behind it was awake, She felt it more than heard it, a thin high thread of the bell sound, several voices of it, restless, and she thought, they know something's wrong too. And then the Grut guard's hand came down on her shoulder and turned her toward Pit 3, and she stopped thinking about the cold wing because there was Gray. They had put him back in the frame. That was the second lie undone. Calm day, and they had him racked in the cradle again, all 4 lower limbs cuffed, 4 limbs pinned, his head held in a padded collar brace she had never seen before that let him look only forward. A medical gantry had been rolled up alongside the frame, a thing of arms and lines and a single heavy injector cradled in a locked housing, and around it stood the medical team in their clean suits, and behind the armored glass the gallery was full, and in the director's chair sat Overseer Vex with his long fingers laced, watching the door she came through. "There she is," Vex said, warm through the grill. "Good, go to him, child, calm him. That's all we need from you today." Gray had been fighting the brace. She could see it in the load meters, amber already, and in the way the great muscles stood out cabled under his plate, and in the sound he was making at the handlers, not the bell, the other sound, the ratcheting shriek, the one that had emptied medical bays. But when the low door cycled and she stepped through, he stopped. He stopped so completely and so fast that a medical tech flinched back from the injector housing, and the whole pit went quiet except for the meters, and every eye in the gallery came down to watch the child cross the floor. "Hello, Gray," Nell said. The bell answered her, low and glad, and it broke her heart because he was glad to see her. He was always glad to see her, and they were going to use that. She understood the whole shape of it now, standing under his braced head, Rill's clever compound, Vex's clever plan. They needed him calm. They needed him open. They needed him to trust, because a bond only rewrote itself through the door of trust, and she was the door. The one true thing between them was the tool they had chosen. She was going to be the reason it worked. Unless she wasn't. "Ward," Dr. Rill's voice careful from the gallery, "place your hand on the subject as you normally do. Keep him settled. The team is going to do their work. It will take a few minutes. You need do nothing but stay." Nell looked up at the braced amber eye. She was very small at the base of the frame, a narrow gray figure in a coverall that for once fit her, and she was thinking as fast as she had ever thought in her life, and what she thought was, "If I calm him, they win." And under that, colder, "If I don't, he fights and the meters climb and they sedate him and do it anyway, and he fights it with no one telling him it's all right and he's alone." And under that, colder still, the thing she kept coming back to and could not get past, "There is no version of this where I stop it. There is only the version where he is alone and the version where he is not." She reached up and laid her hand on the seam of his jaw, on the soft place, the way she always did. "I'm here," she said. "Easy, I've got you." And then so low that even the microphone strained, so low it was almost only breath. "Whatever they do, you find me. You hear me. Whatever they do to you in there, you don't chase what they want you to chase. You find me. I'll be right here. Find me." She did not know why she said it. She would never be able to explain why she said it afterward to the people who asked, and a great many people would ask. It was not a plan. It was not strategy. She had no idea what the compound did or how it worked or what a bond was made of. She was 11, and she was frightened, and she had one true thing in the world and they were reaching for it. And so she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to hold on to it and tell it to hold on to her. Up in the gallery, Dr. Rill went very still. "Overseer," she said quietly, off the grill, on the internal channel so the pit couldn't hear, "the child is talking to it. The child always talks to it. I don't like the shape of it. She's giving it an instruction, directed. She's telling it to fix on her." Rill's fingers moved on her slate. "Overseer, the window works by salience, by what the animal is attending to when the compound takes hold. If she has its whole attention pointed at herself at the moment of administration. Then our signature is stronger," Vex said. "We flood the window. We plan to flood the window. Doctor, we have run this 1100 times. Administer." "The panel," Rill said. "The child's blood panel has it. Administer, Dr. Rill, now while it's calm. That is an order, and it is on the record." And Dr. Rill, who had noticed the one thing that mattered and been overruled on it by a man who had decided the ending in advance, looked down at the child with her hand on the beast's jaw, and looked at the injector in its housing, and made the choice that people in her position had been making at the Harrow for 11 years, which was the safe one for her career, and she keyed the housing open and said, "Administering the terminal compound. Mark the time." The injector arm unfolded from the gantry. Nell heard it. She did not look at it. She kept her eyes on the amber eye above her and her hand on the warm seam of jaw, and she said it one more time, barely moving her lips, "Find me." And then the heavy needle went home in the great cabled throat where the plate gave way, and the last morrec in the galaxy took the severance into its blood. For a moment, nothing happened. The bell went on low and steady. The meters held. The medical team watched their readouts. In the gallery, Vex leaned forward and Rill held her slate in both hands, and Sesh, at the back, where junior handlers stood, found that he had stopped breathing. Then the morrec's eye changed. Nell felt it before she saw it, felt the bell falter, felt the huge slow breath against her hitch and go ragged, felt the muscle under her hand begin to shiver. A fine high tremor running through plate and hide. Wrong, wrong, everything wrong. The amber eye fixed on her, dilated until the vertical slot swallowed itself and the whole eye went black and depthless. And the sound that came out of the animal was one she had never heard in 7 years. Not the bell, not the shriek, but something torn from much deeper. A long rising note that made the medical techs clap their hands to the sides of their heads and drop to their knees. That cracked one of the observation lights, that Nell felt in her teeth and her spine and the small bones of her ears. There, Vex breathed in the gallery. There it is, the windows open. Begin the flood, the handler's signature now saturate it. "It's not attending to the handler," Rill said. Her voice had gone strange. "Overseer, look at the fixation trace. It's not open to the room, it's narrowed to a point." She looked up from her slate and her face, Sesh saw it, her face had gone the color of ash. "It's narrowed to the child, all of it, its entire structure. It's not writable, it's writing." It found something already there and it's. Below, the morrec screamed its torn deep note, and every plate on its body stood up from its hide like the hackles of a thing 1,000 times too large to have hackles, and it turned its black blown eye down at the small human child with her hand on its jaw, and it looked at her. Sesh would try to describe this for the rest of his life and never manage it. It looked at her the way a drowning creature looks at air. The way you look at the one face in the dark that means the dark is over. And Nell, who understood none of the science and all of the thing, held on to the seam of its jaw and did not let go and said, into the tearing sound, calm, clear, the way you steady a spooked animal, the way she had steadied this one 200 times, "I'm here. I'm right here. Find me. That's it. Find me." The morrec found her. The tearing note stopped. It stopped all at once, and into the ringing silence came instead, rising up out of the animal's vast frame, the bell but changed, but enormous, but doubled and trebled and layered as though not one throat but a whole lineage of throats made it at once. A sound so low and so full that the armored glass of the gallery flexed in its frame and the load meters, every one of them went not amber, not red, but dark, dead black. As the frame's sensors gave up trying to measure what was happening and simply stopped. In the gallery, alarms began to sound. "Suppression's gone," a tech was shouting. "Suppression's at 0, cognition's off the scale, the frame's not reading doctor, the frame's not reading anything, we've lost telemetry on the whole." "What is it doing?" Vex said. He had risen from the director's chair. For the first time in 11 months, Sesh heard something in the overseer's voice that was not certainty. "Dr. Rill, what is my animal doing?" Dr. Rill was looking at a single line on her slate, the last line the child's association trace had drawn before the sensors failed, the shape of a bond rewriting itself, and the shape it had drawn was not a new mark being made. It was an old mark being recognized. A structure the animal had been reading, faintly, for 7 years, suddenly flooded and lit and confirmed, blazing up whole and finished as if it had only ever been waiting for enough light to be seen by. "Overseer," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very steady, and Sesh understood from the steadiness of it that she had passed through fear and out the other side into the cold, clear country beyond it. "The child is not a null vector." "Doctor, she was never a null vector. We never tested her. You told me not to move the schedule." Rill set down her slate. "The compound doesn't write a bond. We knew that it makes the structure plastic so a bond can be written. But you can only write on a blank wall. Hers was not blank. There was already a name on it." "There has been a name on it the whole time. That is why the animal chose her when she was 4 years old. That is why nothing we ever did could move it. That is why it metabolizes our compounds like water and takes instruction from a laborer's orphan and no one else in the galaxy." She turned to face him. "We did not open an empty room and write our name. We poured a decade of the Conquered's finest chemistry into confirming permanently for life, past any power of ours to touch, the one bond it already had. We didn't break the keeper bond, Overseer." Somewhere below, the doubled bell went on, and the armored glass hummed, and the child stood at the base of the frame with her hand on the beast's jaw and her plain face turned up and streaming, unafraid. "We finished it. We made it eternal." And she was standing at the base of the frame the whole time telling it to find her. The blast door at the cold end of the beast levels, 3 galleries away, sealed since before the child was born, began. Sesh's own console showed it. A red line waking in a schematic no one was watching, to cycle open. And in Pit 3, the last morrec in the known galaxy, its will not severed but crowned, its bond not stolen but sealed, looked down at the small human keeper it had waited 11 years in a frame to protect, and quietly, deliberately, with the patience of a tide that has finally decided the metal is tired, began to take the cradle apart. "Get her out of there," Vex said. "Get the ward out of the pit, now. Guards." "Overseer, if we send anyone into that pit." "I said get her out." But it was already, Sesh saw, far too late for out. It had been too late since the moment a frightened child had told a war beast to find her, and it had found her, and there is nothing in the science of any species that can unmake a thing like that once it is made. The first cuff sheared. The sound of it was like a bell of a different kind, a great flat toll of alloy giving way, and the morrec drew its freed foreleg out of the ruined housing and slowly, gently, with a care that did not match anything else in the room, folded it down and around the child, and drew her in against the warm plate of its chest, and turned its blown black eye up at the gallery full of the people who had built the harrow, and made a sound at them that was not the bell and was not the shriek, and needed no translation in any tongue in the galaxy. "Mine," it said, "she is mine, and I am hers." And down the dark corridor, past the empty pens, the blast door of the cold wing finished cycling and swung open, and the small high voices behind it, restless for hours, restless for days, restless, Sesh understood now, for far longer than that, lifted all together into a thin, bright answering chorus of the bell, and went quiet and waited to be come for. The last morrec in the galaxy had counted the days in the only way that mattered, which was the days the young were still alive, and it had counted 11 years of them, and it had never once let itself hope the count would end any way but badly. This is the thing the harrow never understood about the animal in its frame, the thing no compound could measure and no model held a column for. It was not enduring. Enduring is what a thing does when it has given up. The morrec had not given up. It had been waiting with the vast, geological patience of a predator bred for a world of long, slow rivers, a patience that made 11 years feel to it the way a single-held breath feels to a shorter-lived thing, waiting for the one variable in the whole rotten station to change, the one it could not force and could not hurry and could only watch for, which was an opening. It had learned the frame the way it learned everything completely, and it had known for years that the frame could be broken on any day it chose. It had not chosen, because breaking the frame did nothing. Breaking the frame did not reach the cold wing. Breaking the frame did not wake the young. Breaking the frame only got handlers killed and got the count ended, because the men who held the young in the freezer had told it, in the one language it could not misread, that the young stayed alive exactly as long as it did not. So it had waited, through the compounds, through the shrieking metal and the amber meters and the padded collar brace it hated more than any other thing they had ever put on it, because the brace held its head so it could not turn to the door the young were behind. 11 years of holding still in a frame it could have torn apart in an afternoon, because holding still was the only thing keeping its children breathing, and a morrec will hold still forever for that. That was what the hero had bought without ever knowing it had bought it, not obedience. Never obedience. A hostage's stillness, mistaken by small frightened people for a stubborn animal that would not break. And then in the second year, the door at the top of the gantry had opened, and something small had come down. It remembered the day with the terrible clarity it remembered everything. It had been scheduled for one of the escalations. It did not have their word for it, but it knew the shape of the day, knew it by the particular fear smell of the handlers, the smell that meant they were about to do a thing to it they were frightened to do. And down the gantry, where no small thing had ever come, had come a human cub, 3 years old or 4, alone. Wrong-footed and unguarded and entirely unafraid, because it was too young to have been taught yet what the morrec was, and it had walked up to the bars of the cage, the way nothing in 11 years walked up to the bars of the cage, and it had looked in at the last of a murdered kind, and the morrec had smelled it. That was the moment, not the taming the handlers imagined. There was no taming, there was never any taming. The moment was sent. Underneath the solvent and the barracks dust and the thin human smallness of it, underneath everything, faint as a note held at the very edge of hearing, the morrec had caught a scent it had not caught since a wet green world 3 jumps coreward, a scent its kind had carried in their marrow for 1,000 generations, the scent that meant the oldest thing its species knew, keeper, keeper, one of the bonded ones, one of the people who belonged to the morrec as the morrec belonged to them. The caste the Concord's haulers had scattered and sold and struck from every record, alive, impossibly, here, in a drum on the wrong side of a dead moon, 3 years old and holding nothing and not knowing what she was. It had gone to the bars. It had made the sound, the true sound, the low, glad one, the one no handler had ever earned from it, and it had lain down, because that is what a morrec does before its keeper, and the small human cub had not understood any of it, had only laughed, delighted at the enormous monster lying down, and had hummed in her thin, small voice 4 notes. 4 notes, the keeper's notes. The old settling call the bonded caste had sung to morrec young on Asun before the count of murdered worlds began, sung down through a scattered, sold, forgotten line to a laborer's daughter in a barracks who thought they were only her mother's, who hummed them to a monster because she did not know they were the single oldest thing her blood remembered how to do. The morrec had known in that moment everything that the hero would spend 4 more years and a fortune failing to learn. It had known what the child was. It had known why nothing they did could move it. And it had made, in the second year of its captivity, lying at the bars before a human cub who did not understand, a decision as total and as patient as the 11-year stillness itself, that it would wait for her. That the opening it had been watching for, the change in the one variable, was not a broken frame or a killed handler. It was this. It was small and it was 3 years old and it did not know what it was yet, and it would take years, and the morrec had years. The morrec had nothing but years. And so it would hold still in the frame and keep the young alive with its stillness and wait for the keeper to grow into what she was. And on the day the small frightened people finally did the one thing that woke her, whatever that thing turned out to be, and the morrec did not need to know what it would be, only that people like these always, in the end, reached for the thing they should have left alone. On that day, it would be ready. It had not known the thing would be a needle. It had not known the compound in the needle was built, with great cleverness, to take the bond and hand it to a stranger. It did not understand the science and did not need to. It understood only what the compound did when it went into its blood, which was to take the faint scent it had been reading at the edge of hearing for 7 years, the keeper's scent, the note held too soft to be sure of, and turn it up, all the way up. Flood it and light it and make it certain, until the thing the morrec had known in secret since the 2nd year and never been able to fully reach was suddenly whole and blazing and finished. The bond it had carried alone across 11 years of the frame confirmed at last from both sides, sealed, permanent, past any power in creation to touch. The handlers thought they were opening a door to write their own name on it. They did not understand that the animal in the frame had been holding that door shut for 7 years by main strength, quietly, so they would not find it, holding the bond faint and deniable and unmeasured precisely, so that no compound and no model would ever key on it, so that the child would stay a mop and a pulse and safe, so that no one would ever run her blood. It had protected her by making her invisible, the way it protected the young by holding still. And the compound had torn the door off its hinges from the inside, and everything the morrec had held down for 7 years had come up at once, and it had not fought it. It had stopped in the tearing, black-eyed moment of it, and heard through all the noise the one voice it had been waiting 11 years to be allowed to answer, saying, find me, and it had let the door come off, and it had found her, and it had turned its freed and blazing and finally complete self toward the gallery full of the people who held its children in a freezer, and it had understood with a clarity like cold water that the waiting was over. The variable had changed, the keeper had woken, and a morrec that has held still for 11 years to keep its young alive, on the day it no longer has to hold still, is not a thing any frame in the galaxy was ever built to contain, because it was never the frame that held it. It was the freezer. It was the count. It was the young. And the young, it knew now, watching the cold-wing door cycle open 3 galleries away at the far edge of its hearing, were about to stop being a hostage and start being a pack. It took the first cuff in its jaws, and it thought, in the wordless, enormous way of its kind, the thought it had not let itself think in 11 years. Now, the harrow went to lockdown in the space of a breath. Sesh knew the sound of it the way he knew his own pulse, the drum's ambient hum dropping half a tone as the reactor throttled up, the corridor lights sliding from gray to the deep amber of a station that has decided to trap something inside itself. Blast doors slammed down the beast levels one after another, a rolling percussion working outward from Pit 3, and the gallery's own emergency seals dropped across the exits with a sound like teeth closing. In the pit below, the morrec did not so much as glance at any of it. It went on freeing itself from the ruined frame with the same unhurried patience it had shown for 11 years, one cuff at a time. The child gathered against its chest, and the lockdown was to it what a raised voice is to a tide. Containment, Vex was saying. He had not sat back down. He stood at the console rail with both hands flat on it, and Sesh watched him do the thing that had made him feared across 4 programs, which was to stop being surprised faster than anyone else in the room. Full containment. I want the pit flooded with the heavy suppressant on my mark, and I want the ward extracted first. She is still the key. As long as we hold the child, we hold the animal. Dr. Rill. You do not hold the animal, Rill said. She had not moved from where she stood. She was still looking down into the pit, at the beast and the child, and there was something in her face now that Sesh had never expected to see on a harrow scientist, which was awe, unguarded and total, the awe of a person who has spent her life measuring a thing and has just watched it become real. You are still thinking about it as leverage, she said. The child as a key we turn. Overseer, you have it precisely backward, and if you act on the backward version you will kill everyone in this gallery. The bond is not a leash we hold by holding her. The bond is the animal's entire reason to exist, and we have just made it permanent, and the animal now understands. Because it is not stupid, it was never stupid. We only needed it to be stupid, that we are the thing between it and its keeper. You do not hold the child as leverage over the beast. You hold the child as a match over an ammunition store. She finally turned to look at him. Flood that pit, and the last thing the suppressant does before it works is tell the animal we are trying to take her. And then it will not matter what the frame was rated to hold, because the frame is already gone. Below, as if to end the argument, the last cuff sheared. The morrec rose. Sesh had seen the animal on its feet perhaps a dozen times in 9 years, always braced, always partial, always inside some cage rated to contain it. He had never seen it stand free, and he understood, watching it unfold to its full height in the ruin of the frame, that no one now alive had that the conquered had bought it in stasis, and kept it in steel, and had, in 11 years, never once let it simply stand, because to let it stand was to admit what it was. It came up on 4 limbs and then higher, its forelimbs lifting the child with it, cradled, and it filled the pit, its lowered head nearly at the level of the gallery glass, and the amber had come back into its eyes. The black had bled away and left the amber calm now, terribly calm, and it looked at the people behind the armored glass with those calm amber eyes, one at a time, unhurried, learning their faces. Sesh had the sudden, certain understanding that it was memorizing them. "It's cataloging us," Dr. Rill said softly, and there was almost admiration in it. "It remembers faces for decades. The old survey said so. It is looking at each of us and deciding, I think, who was in the room." "Then get us out of the room," said the auditor from the Corps, who had come for a vote and gotten this, and whose gray robes were no longer composed. "Overseer, open the gallery seals. We are behind armored glass, that thing cannot." The morrec set the child down. It did it gently, folding down to lay her on her feet on the scored floor, and it kept one forelimb curved behind her, not restraining, shielding, and it never took its eyes off the gallery while it did it. And the child, Sesh watched the small gray figure straighten, watched her put one hand back against the great gray foreleg the way she had 200 times, watched her turn her plain streaked face up to the glass. The child spoke, and the pit's microphones, which had survived, carried her thin clear voice up into the gallery, where 11 important people stood trapped behind glass they had just remembered was only as strong as the wall it was set in. "He can hear all of you," Nell said. "He always could. He can hear your hearts going. He's not going to hurt me. He was never going to hurt me. That's the part you never wrote down." "Ward," Vex said. He had found his voice again, and it was smooth again, and Sesh marveled bleakly at the man's nerve even now. "Nell, listen to me. You are frightened, and you have every reason to be, and I am going to help you. That animal is not in its right mind. The compound has damaged it. It is not the friend you knew. It is dangerous, and I need you to walk to the low door and come up to us where it is safe. Can you do that for me? Walk to the door." Nell looked at him through the glass for a long moment. "You gave me a coverall that fit," she said. "This morning. You've never done that. 7 years and you never once cared what size I was, and this morning you gave me a clean one that fit because you wanted me to feel like today was special, so I'd be soft when you did it." Her voice did not shake. That was the thing Sesh could not get past in the retelling, all the years after, that the child's voice did not shake, that it was the calmest voice in the whole trapped gallery. "You were going to take him from me and send me to the lower drum and let him think I just stopped coming. You were going to make him yours and let him spend the rest of his life doing what you said and thinking I left him." She shook her head slowly. "I'm not walking to the door." "Nell, and you should stop talking now," she said, "because he doesn't like the sound of your voice. He never has. He's just never been allowed to say so." The morrec at that lowered its head until its lowered head was level with the gallery glass, a body length away, and looked at Overseer Vex through the armor and made very quietly, very deliberately, the ratcheting shriek. Just once. Just a bar of it. The sound that had emptied medical bays. and the armored glass of the gallery, rated to stop a slug thrower at point-blank range, developed from one edge to the other, a single fine crack. The auditor made a sound and stepped back into the seated ranks. "Suppressant," Vex said, "now full flood. Override the ward's proximity lock. I don't care about the child, flood the overseer, the lock won't. Flood IT." And a junior handler at the environmental board, young, frightened, doing what an overseer screamed at him to do, the way Sesh had raised his hand at the vote, the way they all did the thing the overseer said, hit the release. Nothing happened. The handler hit it again. He looked at his board, and Sesh, who could see the board from where he stood, saw the reason bloom red across it, and felt something turn over in his chest that he would not until much later recognize as hope. The suppressant lines to Pit 3 ran through the beast levels. The beast levels were in lockdown. And the lockdown had sealed the delivery manifold along with everything else, because the Harrow's own safety system, built by frightened people to trap dangerous things, could not tell the difference between trapping the animal and starving the tools meant to subdue it. They had sealed the pit so thoroughly that they had sealed their own hands inside the walls. "The manifold's locked out," the handler said, his voice climbing. "The whole delivery system's behind the lockdown seals. I can't, overseer, I can't reach it. The lockdown's got it. We'd have to lift containment on the beast levels to reach the..." "Then lift it." "Overseer, if we lift containment, the animal is loose in the..." "The animal is loose regardless," Vex said, and for the first time his smoothness cracked, and underneath it Sesh heard the thing the man had been the whole time, which was frightened and cornered and unused to either. "Look at it. Look at what it did to the glass. Our containment is a suggestion. I would rather have the manifold and the animal loose in a corridor I can flood than a sealed pit I cannot touch. Lift the beast level lockdown, flood the corridors, drive it toward the outer bay, and put enough suppressant in the air to drop a station. Do it in that order. Do it now." And here at last Sesh moved. He did not decide to. That was the honest account, the one he gave and re-gave and never once dressed up. He did not weigh it. He did not think of the memo or the debt or the birth. He simply found himself already moving, already at the environmental board, already putting his own hand down over the young handlers before the sequence could go through. 9 years of raising his hand when the overseer said raise it, and it turned out the whole time there had been this in him, waiting, the way the bond had waited 7 years in a laborer's orphan for enough light to be seen. "No," Sesh said. The gallery looked at him. "If you lift the lockdown," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he had any right to, "you don't drive it toward the bay. You open the beast levels, all of them. Overseer, the cold wing seal already cycled. It's on my console. It's been open for 4 minutes. Nobody watched it because nobody was watching anything but the pit." He met Vex's eyes across the trapped gallery. "You lift containment on the beast levels right now, and you don't loose one morrec into the corridors. You loose all of them." The word landed in the gallery like a dropped tool. "All of them." Sesh watched the understanding go around the ranks the way the understanding about the child had gone around 3 days before, one face at a time, the auditors, the techs, Rills, though Rill had already known. Rill had known for 4 minutes and simply not said, because she had wanted, Sesh thought, to see if anyone else would find their way there on their own. The cold wing. The thing junior handlers were not cleared to know and had trained themselves not to wonder about. The reason the last morrec in the galaxy had been kept alive and compliant for 11 years instead of vivisected in its first month. The leverage the Harrow had held over its impossible captive the whole time. The one lever that had ever worked on the animal before a 4-year-old wandered down a gantry. "There are young," the auditor said slowly. "In the cold wing, the program held young." "The program held a clutch," Dr. Rill said. She did not look away from the pit. "Recovered from Asan in the pacification, the same operation that took the adult. 7 of them, in cold suspension, viable. That was the leverage. That is why the animal endured everything we did to it for 11 years without ever once truly trying to end us, though it could have on any day it chose. It endured because we told it, in the only language it could not misread, that the young stayed alive as long as it behaved. She finally turned. Her ashen face had set into something Sesh could not name. We did not keep an apex weapon in a frame for a decade because our frame was strong, overseer. We kept it because we held its children in a freezer and it knew it. And you have just, with a compound of my own design, given it a keeper who would sooner die than let us keep them. Do you understand now? Do you finally understand what is in the pit? Below, the child had turned from the gallery. She was no longer looking at the people who had built the harrow. She was looking down the dark corridor, past the empty pens, toward the far end, where a blast door stood open for the first time in her life, and where a thin, bright chorus of small bell voices was calling, and had been calling, she now understood, for as long as she had been pressing her hand to that cold metal and feeling nothing and telling no one. "Gray," she said quietly, "there's more of you down there." "That's what I always heard." She put her hand flat on the great gray foreleg. You knew the whole time. That's why you never left, even when you could have. You were staying close to them." The morrec turned its head toward the far corridor, and then back to her, and lowered its huge blunt skull until its brow rested for a moment against her small chest, gentle as a closing door, and made the bell the true bell, the low, glad one, the one she had named when she was 6. And Nell, 11 years old, a laborer's orphan in a coverall that for once fit, standing in the ruin of a frame built to break the last of a murdered kind, made the decision that the whole trapped gallery was about to spend the rest of the night failing to stop. "Then let's go get them," she said. The low door of Pit 3 was rated to stop a charging morrec. It stopped this one for perhaps 4 seconds. Sesh watched it on his console from the gallery. Because there was nothing else he could do, Vex had ordered the gallery seals to stay down, had trapped his own review board behind the cracked glass rather than open a route the animal might reach. And so the 11 most important people at the harrow stood watching a bank of monitors like everyone else, prisoners of the containment they had built. On the monitor, the morrec set one forelimb against the low door, and leaned with that terrible patience, and the door, steel a hand's breadth thick, bolted into the living rock of the moon, folded back off its hinges like a sheet of foil and rang down the corridor beyond. The child walked through the gap it left. The morrec followed, folding itself low to pass, and then the two of them were out of the pit and into the beast levels, and the monitors handed them off camera to camera as they went, small gray child and vast gray beast, down the long, dark throat of the intake corridor toward the cold wing. "Guards to the beast levels," Vex said. "Every grut on the station, fall back to the cold wing junction and hold it. The animal does not reach that clutch. Whatever else happens tonight, it does not reach that clutch. The young are the only leverage we have left, and I will not lose them to sentiment." "The grut won't hold it," Dr. Rill said. "The grut are 3 meters of muscle in ceramic plate, and they are paid to hold things." "They are paid to hold things that want to get past them," Rill said. "This is not a thing that wants to get past them. This is a thing that wants to get to its children with its keeper walking in front of it, and there is a difference, overseer, that your models never had a column for." She watched the monitors. "I would pull them back. You are about to spend good guards to buy nothing." Vex did not pull them back. Sesh watched it happen on the monitors, and he was glad afterward that it happened on the monitors and not in front of him, because even at a camera's remove it was a great deal. The grut met the morrec at the cold wing junction, 6 of them, the whole station's muscle, riot shields locked and shock lances lit, and they were not cowards. Grut were never cowards. It was not in them, and they did exactly what they were paid to do, which was stand in the corridor and refuse to move. And the child stopped a dozen paces short of them and looked at them, 6 3-meter guards in ceramic plate with their lances crackling, and she said, In that thin, clear voice the microphones carried all over the station. "You should sit down. I don't want him to hurt you. Sit down and put the lances on the floor and he'll walk right past you. He doesn't care about you. He only cares that you're between us and them." The lead grut, to his credit or his doom, did not sit down. It was over in less time than it takes to describe, and Sesh will not describe it, because there is a kind of describing that becomes a kind of savoring, and he had watched enough of that at the Harrow to last several lifetimes. He will say only this, that the morrec did not kill them, though it could have, though every one of them had expected to die and had planted their feet to die anyway, that it went through them the way weather goes through a fence, and left them scattered and stunned and disarmed along the corridor walls, plates cracked and lances bent and pride ended, but breathing, all 6 of them breathing. And that it did this because the child, walking in front of it with her hand trailing back to touch its lower jaw, had said don't, had said just move them, had said they're only doing what he tells them, and the last morrec in the galaxy, which had spent 11 years being unable to disobey the people who held its children, had discovered in the space of a single night what it was to take an instruction from someone who loved it, and would, Sesh understood, watching the guards slide down the walls, sooner have died than exceed it. That was the moment the whole thing turned over in Sesh, finally, and past any going back. Not the frame breaking, not the glass cracking. This, that the beast was gentler with its enemies than its keepers had ever been, because its keeper had asked it to be, and its keeper was 11 years old and had never in her life been shown a mercy she was now spending on the men who came to kill her. Sesh, Dr. Rill had come to stand beside him at the console. She spoke low, under the gallery's noise, so only he could hear. "You stopped the manifold sequence." "Yes. That will cost you everything you have." "I know." She was quiet a moment. On the monitors, the child and the beast reached the Coldwing Junction and passed through it, over the scattered guards, toward the open blast door and the bright thin chorus beyond. "There is a maintenance override for the outer bay," Rill said, still very low, still not looking at him. "Below the environmental board. It is not on the lockdown circuit. It was wired separately, years ago, by a technician who wanted a way out that the directors couldn't seal, and then he transferred Coreward and nobody ever found it because nobody ever reads the old wiring. I found it my 2nd year here. I have never told anyone." Now she did look at him, and her ashen scientist's face had something in it he had not seen there before, something that might, in a person who had spent less of her life measuring terrible things, have been called grief, or shame, or the beginning of both. If a person wanted to open a way off this station for something the lockdown was trying to keep in, that override would do it. It is under a gray panel marked coolant, 3rd from the left. It has never been coolant. Sesh looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because I designed the compound," Dr. Rill said simply. "Because I noticed the one thing that mattered and I let a frightened man overrule me, the way you raised your hand at the vote. Because I have spent 11 years measuring the most extraordinary bond in the known galaxy and calling it a structure so that I would not have to call it what it is. And because that child down there just spent a mercy on 6 guards that no one ever spent on her, and I find that I would rather be the person who told you about the gray panel than the person who watched the monitors." She straightened. Her voice went flat and clinical again, the armor going back on. "That is a great deal of sentiment from a null vector, isn't it? Go, before the overseer decides what you did to the manifold means what it means." Sesh went. Nell had imagined the cold wing, in 7 years of pressing her hand to its door, in 100 different shapes, and none of them was the true one. She had imagined monsters. She had imagined on the bad nights a machine, some grinding thing that made the small high bell voices out of nothing to torment her. She had never once imagined this. A low round chamber, frost-white and blue-lit, ringed with 7 upright cylinders of clouded glass, and in each cylinder, curled and suspended and asleep in a pale drift of cold, a morrec cub. They were not small. That was her first absurd thought, that no one had told her that in her mind they had been kitten things, and here each was already the size of a grown grut, six-limbed, plate soft and unset and pale as new bone, folded nose to tail in the suspending cold. Cubs the way a young war beast is a cub, enormous and unfinished and terribly asleep. 7 of them. She stood in the door of the round white room and counted them, and her breath came out of her in a cloud, and she thought, they've been here the whole time. The whole time she had scrubbed the corridor and eaten the ration bars the clerk forgot, and pressed her hand to the cold door feeling nothing. The whole time, 7 sleeping children of the thing she loved had hung in the frost 12 meters away, and the harrow had held them there as a knife at Gray's throat, and Gray had known, and had stayed, and had endured everything to be near them. Behind her, the morrec came into the round room, and when it saw the cylinders it made a sound she had never heard it make and never would forget. A long, low, broken note, grief and relief tangled past separating. The sound of a thing that has carried a stone 11 years and has just been told it may set the stone down. It went to the nearest cylinder and pressed its blunt brow to the clouded glass over the sleeping cub within, and the doubled bell rose out of it, the layered lineage sound, and Nell understood that it was not calling to her now. It was calling to them. It was telling them, in the only language it had, the thing it had not been able to tell them for 11 years across a sealed door. I'm here. I'm here. It's over. Wake up. How do I wake them? Nell said. She had crossed to the nearest cylinder without deciding to. Frost fog rolled off the cold glass over her hands. Gray, how do I? She looked for a panel, a control, anything, and found on a pedestal at the center of the ring a single console, dark, locked, and above it a small screen that woke to her presence and asked her, in the flat blue letters of a conquered machine, for an authorization she did not have and would never have. Clutch suspension, ward level access DENIED, contact program director. Of course, Nell said softly, of course it's him. It doesn't have to be. She turned. A figure had come into the round room behind the morrec, a Thren in a handler's gray, one mandible cracked, breathing hard, and it took her a moment in the blue frostlight to place him, because she had never once seen him move fast. Sesh, the tired one, the one who brought ration bars. The morrec turned from the cylinder and put itself between the handler and the child in a single flowing motion, and the ratcheting shriek began to build in its chest, and Sesh froze with his hands out and open and empty. Nell, he said fast to the child past the beast, tell him I'm not. I helped. I stopped the flood. I'm the reason the pit's not full of suppressant right now. Tell him, please. Gray, Nell put her hand on the great gray flank. Easy, easy, this one's all right. He's the tired one. He brings me the bars sometimes. The shriek did not stop, but it dropped, wound down to a low warning idle, and the morrec did not move from between them, but it let the handler stand. What do you mean it doesn't have to be him? The suspension. Sesh kept his hands open. He did not look away from the beast. The clutch, it's on the same authorization tree as the terminal protocol because it was all one program, all one director's sign-off. Vex approved the severance this morning under his own director's key. That key is still live. It's still authorized in the system right now tonight. He never revoked it. Why would he? He thought he'd won. He risked a step toward the console. The beast tracked him with one amber eye. The compound and the clutch were signed under the same authority. If we push the release from a terminal that's already carrying his authorization for tonight's procedure, it won't ask again. It'll think it's already been asked. The overseer approved the final injection, Nell. He doesn't know it yet, but when he signed that, he signed for this too. Nell looked at him. You're saying, she said slowly, that the thing he did to take Gray away from me, the thing he approved, is the same key that opens their door. I'm saying his own signature is sitting live in the system with the door in reach of it, Sesh said. I'm saying the last thing he approved was the one thing that undoes him. I just need a terminal that's inside the procedure's authorization, and I need about 40 seconds nobody's shooting at me. He was already at the console, already crouching, already prizing the dark pedestal open with a handler's multi-tool, his cracked mandible clicking. The panel in the gallery's locked to me now, but this one's a suspension node. It's downstream, it's dumb, it'll take the authorization if I feed it right. Overhead, the round room speaker crackled, and Overseer Vex's voice came into the cold white chamber. No longer smooth, no longer warm, stripped down at last to the frightened cornered thing beneath. "Handler Sesh," it said, "step away from the suspension node. I can see you. I can see all of you. There are cameras in the cold wing that answer only to me, and I am watching you throw your entire life into a freezer for a human child and a monster. And I am telling you, as the only person on this station still thinking clearly, that if you wake that clutch, you do not save 7 cubs. You lose 8 adult morrec onto a conquered installation within the year, and the conquered does not lose installations quietly, and everyone you have ever, the low wing, the ore crews, the human families in the lower drum, all of them, everyone pays for what walks out of that room tonight. Step away. This is still recoverable. Nothing here is broken that cannot be." "You keep saying that," Nell said. She had walked to the pedestal, to stand over the crouching handler, to speak up into the blank eye of the camera she could not see but knew was there. "You keep saying nothing's broken. You said it about Gray, the compound damaged him, he's not himself, come to the door. You said it about the guards, still recoverable, hold the junction. You keep telling everyone nothing's broken, so they'll wait, so they'll stand still, so you can find the next thing." She was not shaking. She had stopped, somewhere back in the pit, being able to shake. "I lived my whole life in your station, and I know what you sound like now. You sound like the clerk when the food's short and he's telling us it's coming. It's never coming. You just want us to hold still." She looked down at Sesh's hands, working in the guts of the pedestal, and then back up at the camera. "Do it, Sesh. Open their door." "Handler," Vex said, and there was murder in it now, flat and final. "If you touch that release, I will have the outer bay vented, and I will end this station, and everything on it before I let a clutch of apex weapons walk free of my—" "You approved it this morning," Sesh said. He said it quietly, almost gently, the way you'd tell a man a thing he should have seen coming, and he pressed his cracked mandibled face close to the little screen, and he fed the live authorization down the dumb downstream node, the director's own key, signed under his own hand for the terminal protocol, still warm in the system, never revoked, and the screen that had told the child ward-level access DENIED blinked and considered, and found the overseer's authorization already present for the night's procedure, and did not think to ask whether the man who signed it had meant this door too. Clutch suspension, director authorization confirmed, revival sequence initiated. All 7 cylinders at once began to warm. "There," Sesh breathed and sat back on his heels and started helplessly to laugh, the cracked, exhausted laugh of a man who has finally, after 9 years, done the one thing he came to this dead moon swearing he would never stay long enough to be too tired to do. There it is. He signed for it himself. He signed for all of it himself. And in the 7 clouded cylinders, in the pale drift of the retreating cold, 7 enormous unfinished children of a murdered species stirred, and uncurled, and one by one slow and stunned, and newborn into a world that had spent 11 years trying to keep them asleep, opened their eyes, and looked, past the frost, past the glass, at the vast gray adult pressing its brow to the cylinders and the small, warm human child standing in the blue light with her hand raised flat against the fog. And made, all 7 of them together, thin and bright and rising, the sound their kind makes when the dark is finally over. The bell. The first cub out of its cylinder went straight to Nell and knocked her flat and would not get off her. It came out of the retreating cold on legs that did not yet entirely work, all 6 of them at cross purposes, and it staggered past its own vast parent and past the crouching handler and past the 7 clouded cylinders, and it went to the child, unerring, the way water finds the lowest place, and it put its great unfinished skull against her chest and simply leaned, all its newborn weight, until she sat down hard on the frost-slick floor, with a cub the size of a grut draped across her lap, making a sound like a small engine trying to start. "Oh," Nell said. "Oh, hello, hello. Easy, easy, you're all right, I've got you." And then she couldn't say anything else because the second cub had reached her, and the third, and they came off their newborn legs and into her the way the first had, without hesitation, without instruction, without any of the 4 years of failed conditioning and clean corporate compounds the harrow had poured into their parent, and they buried the child in themselves. 7 enormous soft-plated infants of a murdered species piling onto the one small warm human in the room, and the round white cold-wing chamber filled up with the bright layered bell of it. And Nell Artery, 11 years old, laborer's orphan, disappeared entirely under a heap of the deadliest young the galaxy had ever grown, laughing and crying, and saying over and over the only thing there was to say, which was, "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you." Sesh sat back on his heels in the blue light and watched it and could not speak. He understood what he was seeing. That was the thing that undid him. Not that it was strange, but that it wasn't, that it was the most natural thing he had ever witnessed. 7 children going to the one person in the universe built to hold them, and that the harrow had spent 11 years and the lives of 19 handlers, and an obscene fraction of a core-word budget trying to manufacture, in a vial, by force, on a schedule. The thing that was happening for free on the floor in front of him, because a child with the right name in her blood had told a frightened creature to find her. They had never needed the compound. They had never needed the frame. They had needed, the entire time, only to have not murdered the keepers, and having murdered them, having done the one unforgivable thing, they had spent a decade trying to buy their way back to what they'd destroyed. And it could not be bought, it could only be born, and it had been born, 4 years ago, in an ore crew barracks in the lower drum, to a mother the station logged and forgot. "Dr. Rill was right," he said to no one, to the cold room. "You can't write on a wall that already has a name, you can only read it." He wiped at his cracked mandible with the back of one hand. 11 years. It was in the low wing the whole time, holding a mop. The adult morrec moved among the cubs and the child, enormous and careful, nosing each of the 7, counting them the way a thing counts what it thought it had lost. And when it had counted all 7 and found them whole, it lowered itself down around the entire pile, child and clutch together, and curved its vast gray body into a wall between them and the door, and laid its blunt head down over the top of them, and looked at Sesh across the heap of its recovered family with 2 calm amber eyes. And Sesh understood that he had been counted too, not as family, but as not between, as allowed. It was, he thought, the highest honor he had ever been paid, and it had been paid to him by a war beast on the floor of a freezer, and he found he would not have traded it for a directorship. Then the speaker crackled again, and Vex's voice came down into the cold, and it had changed one final time. The murder had gone out of it. What was left was worse, because what was left was calm, the flat, resourced calm of a man who has stopped trying to recover the situation and started trying to win it at any cost. "Handler Sesh, Ward, I want you to listen very carefully because I am only going to explain this once, and then I am going to begin." Sesh got to his feet. "The distress beacon fired when the frame lost telemetry," Vex said. "Automatically. I did not send it and I cannot recall it. That means a Concord response is already inbound to Senate, a picket frigate, the Vaunt, 9 hours out, coming to find out why a black program station on the wrong side of a dead moon went dark. When it arrives, it will find one of 2 things. It will find a program director who contained an incident, a compound reaction, regrettable losses, the animal and the clutch secured, the situation held. Or it will find 8 loose morrec and a station full of witnesses, and it will do to Senate what the Concord did to Asan, and it will not lose a single hour's sleep over the human families in the lower drum, because the Concord does not clean up a morrec breach with a mop, Ward. It cleans it up with fire. Everyone you have ever known dies in the next 9 hours, unless I have something to show the vaunt when it comes. You want to put them back in the freezer, Nell said, from under the cubs. I want to be able to tell the vaunt that the clutch is secured, Vex said. How I secure it is a detail. Yes, the suspension. Back into the cylinders, all 7, and the adult back to a frame. And you child, you turn out to be the most valuable asset this program ever had. Do you understand? You are not a mop. You never were. You are the keeper. You are the thing 4 directors died looking for. And the Conquered will build you a palace, and I will personally see that you never scrub another floor as long as you live. All of it. Anything. The alternative is that the vaunt burns Senate in 9 hours and you and your monster and your 7 children die anyway, along with everyone in the lower drum for nothing. A pause. I am not your enemy, Nell. I am the only one left offering you a way where the children in the lower drum live. Put them back to sleep. Come up to the gallery, be the keeper for us, and everyone lives. For a long moment the Coldwing chamber was silent, but for the low, idling bells of the cubs. Nell disentangled herself from the pile, gently, setting each cub's head down as she rose, and they let her, watching her with their new amber eyes, and she stood in the middle of the round blue room with 7 war beast cubs and 1 adult arranged around her like the points of something, and she looked up at the camera she could not see. My mother used to hum 4 notes, she said. It was not an answer to anything he'd said, and Sesh saw, on his own console, the small readout that showed Vex was still listening, still waiting, thrown by it. 4 notes. When I was small, before the sorting gallery, she'd hum them at night in the barracks and I'd go to sleep. I didn't know they were anything. I thought they were just hers. And when they put me in the pit the first time when I was 4, and everybody was scared of the monster and they shoved me in as a last thing to try, I was scared too. I didn't know what he was, and I did the only thing I knew to do to make a scary dark less scary, which was hum the 4 notes my mother hummed. She put her hand out and the nearest cub pushed its skull up under it. And he stopped. The monster stopped. Everybody thought I had a gift. Everybody spent 4 years and all that money trying to find out what I did to him. Her voice did not rise, but it went, somehow, all through the cold room, all through the station, thin and clear and final. I didn't do anything. It was the notes. It was my mother's 4 notes. And I've been thinking, this whole night, about how a laborer's daughter in an Orcrew barracks 3 jumps from anywhere just happened to know the exact sound that calms the last morrec in the galaxy. She looked up at the blind camera. You didn't just kill the keepers, did you? You scattered the ones you didn't kill, sold them cheap to stations on the wrong side of dead moons, to sort ore, to hold mops, to be nobody. And one of them ended up here. And she hummed her mother's notes to her own daughter in the dark, and neither of them ever knew what they were. And you kept the last morrec 12 meters from the last keeper for 7 years and never once ran her blood, because she was a mop and a pulse. Nell lowered her hand to the cub's warm skull. I'm not putting them back to sleep. And I'm not being your keeper. I already have a pack. I've had it my whole life. I just didn't know it had a name. Then Senate burns, Vex said. Senate doesn't burn, Sesh said. He surprised himself saying it. He surprised the room. But he had been thinking while the child talked, the way he had been trained to think. The small, careful, bureaucratic thinking that was the only weapon a junior handler owned. And he had found, turning the overseer's own words over, the place where they came apart. The Vaunt's coming to find out why the station went dark, Sesh said. That's what you said. It's not coming to burn a breach. It doesn't know there's a breach. It knows there's silence. 9 hours out and it decides what Senate is when it arrives, based on what it finds and who's telling the story. He crossed to his console, to the gray panel 3rd from the left, the one marked coolant that had never been coolant, and he rested his cracked-mandibled hand on it. You want to be the director who contained an incident. But you're not going to be overseer because you can't put this back. You saw the pit. You saw the guards. You can't get 8 morrec and a keeper into a freezer in 9 hours, and you know it. So the story the Vaunt hears isn't going to be yours. He looked up, though there was no one to look at, Only the blind cameras and the trapped gallery 3 levels up. It's going to be whoever's still standing next to the child when the frigate opens its doors. And it's not going to be you. He didn't wait for the answer. He pulled the gray panel off the wall. Behind it, where 11 years of directors had never looked, was a technician's forgotten rebellion, a squat manual override, hand-wired off the lockdown circuit, married to nothing the Harrow's safety system knew to seal. A way out that the men who built the cages had never found because it had been built by someone who wanted, at the end of a long shift on a dead moon, simply to know that a door existed that they could not close on him. "There's a maintenance route from the cold wing to the outer bay," Sesh said to Nell, to the pack, working fast now, feeding the override the sequence Rill had buried in his memory with 3 quiet words under the gallery noise. "Service crawl wide enough for the adult if he folds. It comes out at the small craft bay, the courier boats, the short-range haulers, the things a station keeps for runs the freighters won't do. Not fast, not armed, but they fly and they're off the lockdown grid because they have to be able to launch in an emergency, and the Vaunt's still 8 hours out." The override took the sequence. Somewhere below them, along a route no schematic showed, a series of small service doors that had been sealed since before the child was born woke and considered and began, one after another, to open. You get to the bay, you get the pack aboard a hauler, and you're gone before the frigate's close enough to see what you are, just a courier boat leaving a quiet station, nothing worth burning a moon for. He turned. "But it has to be now. The second Vex works out where you're going, he vents that bay, and there's nothing I can do about the bay, it's on his key and only his." "Then he'll vent it," Nell said quietly. "Then we go fast," said Sesh, "and hope he's slower than his own fear." Above them, through 3 levels of stone and steel, in a gallery of cracked glass and important people, Overseer Vex stood at the environmental board with his long lacquered fingers resting on the outer bay controls, and watched, on the cameras that answered only to him, a handler and a child and 8 morrec begin to move toward the one door off his station, and made the calculation he had been making his whole career, the tidy one, the one about what a thing was worth against what it cost, and reached for the vent. In the gallery, Overseer Vex kept his fingers on the outer bay vent for a long time, and did not press it, and the auditor from the Corps watched him not press it, and understood everything. "You can't," the auditor said. Vex did not answer. On the monitors, the pack was already into the service crawl, already dropping level by level toward the small craft bay, and the vent was right there under his hand. One command. The great outer hatch yawning to vacuum, and the whole problem solved in a howl of escaping air. The animal, the clutch, the keeper, the handler, all of it gone in the time it took a breath to be torn out of a lung. It was the ruthless thing. It was, by every arithmetic Vex had ever trusted, the correct thing, and his fingers rested on it and did not move. "You worked it out at the same moment I did," the auditor said. He had stopped being afraid. Somewhere in the last hour, there is a point past which a man in disarrayed gray robes has nothing left to be afraid of, and the auditor had reached it. The keeper is the only thing that turns this back into a career. A dead keeper is a burned station and a tribunal. A live keeper is the most valuable asset the conquered has produced in a generation, and you are the director who recovered it. You cannot vent that bay, Overseer, because venting it kills the one thing that saves you. You have spent your whole life doing the ruthless arithmetic, and the arithmetic has finally handed you a sum you can't pay, because, for the first time, the ruthless thing and the thing you want are pointed in opposite directions. He almost smiled. "So you'll go down to the floor instead. You'll try to take her by hand. You'll stand in front of 8 morrec with a shock baton because you cannot make yourself press the one button that would end it cleanly, because ending it cleanly ends you." "She is 11 years old," Vex said. It was not a defense. Vex did not defend himself ever. It was beneath the tidiness of him. It was almost wonder. "She is 11 years old and she cleaned the intake corridor, and she is worth more than this station, more than the program, more than every director who ever died on it. She was worth more than all of it the entire time. Do you understand what that means, auditor? Do you understand what it means that the thing we spent 11 years and a fortune building was in the low wing holding a mop, and we fed her ration bars when the clerk remembered? It means, the auditor said, that you should have run her blood. It means the whole enterprise was a mistake before I ever arrived, Vex said, and took his fingers off the vent. And for one moment, the only moment the auditor would ever grant him, in all the testimony that came after, the tidy man looked almost human, looked almost like something that could be pitied, standing in the wreck of 11 years of other men's failures with the one prize that could have redeemed all of them, walking out the bottom of his station toward a poor boat. But it is my mistake now. It arrived at my station, and it woke on my schedule, and I signed for it with my own key. So I am going down to the floor, and I am going to take the keeper in hand, because a live keeper is the only story left that ends with me still standing, and I have never once in my life failed to find the story that ends with me still standing. He turned from the console. Overseer, the auditor said, the bay, the animals will be on the loading floor. You will be one man with a baton. The child controls them, Vex said, already moving for the gallery's emergency seal, already reaching for the manual release that would let him down out of the trapped gallery and into the levels below. And I control the child because I am the only one on this station still thinking clearly enough to hold something over her that she cannot walk past. Bring your record if you like, auditor. Bring all of it. It will read very differently when the last line is that I walked onto a loading floor full of morrec and walked off it with the keeper at my side. The seal cycled. The tidy man stepped through it, toward the stairs, toward the bay, toward the loading floor and the fallen baton and the 4 hummed notes that were, though he did not know it, already waiting for him. Every story is a matter of who is still standing at the end to tell it. I have always been the one still standing. I do not intend to stop tonight. And the auditor, left alone in the gallery of cracked glass, looked down at the monitors, at the pack flowing level by level toward the bay and the tidy man descending the stairs to meet it, and did the one thing left to a man in disarrayed robes who has run out of things to be afraid of. He picked up the record, all of it, the whole night, and he made very sure it was still recording, because whatever walked off that loading floor, he intended the galaxy to know exactly what had happened on it. And he had a strong suspicion, watching the small gray figure at the point of the wedge, that the man still standing at the end was not going to be the overseer. They moved through the service crawl as one thing, and Sesh, bringing up the rear, understood that he was watching an army learn to march. The child went first, because the pack would follow nothing else. Then the 7 cubs, still newborn, clumsy on their 6 legs but steadying with every meter, falling without instruction into a loose wedge behind her, not because anyone drilled them, not because anyone could have, but because that was the shape the thing wanted to be, a keeper at the point and her pack at her back, a shape their kind had held on a wet green world 1,000 generations before the Concord's haulers came. Then the adult, folded low to fit the crawl, its plated bulk filling the tunnel behind the cubs, and last of all a tired Thren handler with a cracked mandible and a technician's multi-tool, following an 11-year-old human and 8 war beasts toward the only door off a station that wanted to keep them all. Left at the junction, Sesh called low, then down. The bay's 2 levels below us, the crawl drops through the old ore chutes. He watched the wedge take the left turn ahead of him, the cubs flowing around the corner in sequence, and he thought, absurdly, of the Grut guards planting their feet in the corridor, of the whole apparatus of conquered force the Harrow had assembled to hold this species down, and of how none of it had ever looked like this, because none of it had ever had a reason to move that it chose for itself. Nell. When we reach the bay, the couriers are on the far side past the loading floor. Get the pack aboard the biggest hauler, the flat-nosed one. It's got a rear ramp and a hold that'll take the adult if he lies down. I'll get the launch sequence up. Don't stop on the loading floor. Whatever's on the loading floor, don't stop. Why would something be on the loading floor? Nell said. Because he'll have worked out where we're going by now, Sesh said. And because I keep waiting for him to vent the bay, and he hasn't. And a man like the overseer doesn't fail to do the ruthless thing unless the ruthless thing costs him something he wants more. He was right. That was the whole shape of Overseer Vex, laid bare at last, and Sesh had read it correctly from 3 levels up. Vex had not vented the bay. Sesh had braced for it at every service door. The klaxon, the great slow yawn of the outer hatch cycling to vacuum, the pack lost in a howl of escaping air. And it had not come. And Sesh had spent the whole descent trying to understand why, and only understood it when the crawl dropped them out through an old ore chute onto the high gallery above the small craft bay, and he saw the loading floor below. Vex was on the loading floor. He stood at its center, between the pack and the couriers, in the deep amber of the lockdown lights, and he was not alone. The auditor from the Corps stood a little apart from him in disarrayed gray robes, and Dr. Rill a little apart from them both, and a half-dozen of the station's remaining crew ringed the floor, techs and clerks, and 2 grut who had not been at the junction, all of them drawn down here at the overseer's order to witness whatever he had decided was going to happen. And Sesh understood, looking down at the tidy man standing in the center of the one door off his station, exactly what Vex wanted more than he wanted safety, and it turned his stomach. Vex wanted the asset. He could not vent the bay because venting the bay destroyed the keeper, and the keeper was the only thing in the galaxy that could turn this catastrophe back into a career. 9 hours from a conquered frigate, the last director of the Harrow had looked at a child who could command the deadliest army ever grown and had decided, in the tidy arithmetic that had carried him through 4 programs, that he was not going to lose that. He was going to keep it. He had come down to the bay to take it in hand. That's far enough, Vex said up to the gallery. He had a device in one hand, small, matte, and Sesh's blood went cold, because he knew it was a handler's shock baton, the close-range kind, the kind rated to drop a large animal at a touch, useless against a morrec and entirely sufficient against a child. Ward, Nell, you are going to come down to the loading floor by yourself, and you are going to send the animals into the hold of the flat-nosed hauler, and you are going to seal them in it. And then you and I are going to be standing on this floor together when the Vaunt arrives, and I am going to tell the Conquered that I contained an incident and recovered the most valuable asset in the program's history, and you are going to be alive, and your pack is going to be alive, and every human family in the lower drum is going to be alive. That is the offer. It is the last one. The alternative is that I am holding this. He lifted the baton. And you are 11 years old, and the moment that animal comes off this gallery to reach you, I touch you with it. And then we find out how much the last morrec loves a keeper it can watch convulse on a loading floor while it's still 40 meters away. The bay went silent. On the high gallery, Nell looked down at the man in the amber light, and at the baton in his hand, and at the ring of station crew who had been brought here to watch, and at the auditor in his disarrayed robes who had come for a vote and got this, and Sesh beside her, felt the adult morrec go very still at his back, felt the low idling warning wind down not into calm but into something flatter and more total, and he put his hand out without thinking and rested it on the great gray flank and felt. Under the plate the animal's heart, going slow, going slow, going slow. He'd do it, Nell said quietly to Sesh, not to Vex. He really would. He'd hurt me to keep me. He thinks that's the same as saving me. She was very calm. Sesh had stopped being surprised by the child's calm somewhere back in the pit, but this was a new kind, a settled kind, the calm of someone who has finished being afraid of a thing because she has finally understood it all the way to the bottom. That's the whole station, isn't it? That's what this whole place always was, hurting something to keep it and calling it saving. Nell, Sesh said low, the shock baton against you, it's real. He's not wrong about that, and the adult's 40 meters off. He can't cross the floor before. He doesn't have to cross the floor, Nell said. And she stepped up to the gallery rail, in full view of the loading floor, in full view of the ring of crew and the auditor and the overseer with his baton, and she did the thing that Sesh would tell for the rest of his life, the thing the auditor would carry back to the Corps, and the crew would carry to every station they ever worked, and the Vaught's inspectors would take down in a record that no black program would ever quite manage to bury. She did not shout. She did not command. She did not point the pack at the man the way Vex kept expecting her to, because she had never once in her life pointed anything at anyone. She had spent 11 years being the smallest thing in every room and asking for nothing. She hummed 4 notes, her mother's 4 notes. The scrap of a lullaby she had carried out of an crew barracks she barely remembered, the sound she had made to a monster when she was 4 because it was the only thing she knew to do against the dark. She leaned on the gallery rail 40 meters above the man who meant to hurt her, and she hummed the 4 low notes into the silence of the bay, soft and unhurried and unafraid. And the pack answered. Not with the shriek, not with violence. There was no violence. That was the thing Sesh could never make people understand afterward, that nothing on the loading floor was touched, that not a single blow was struck. The 8 morrec lifted the 4 notes off the child's breath and gave them back, all of them at once, the adult and the 7 cubs together, and the sound they made was the bell, but the doubled bell, the layered lineage bell, the sound of a whole murdered kind answering its keeper, and it came up out of them and rolled down over the loading floor and filled the bay from deck to gantry. And it was not loud, exactly. It was vast. It was the sound of the ground itself agreeing with the child. And every creature on that floor who was not a morrec and not a keeper felt it in the fluid behind their eyes and the marrow of their limbs, and understood, in a place older than language, older than the conquered, older than the first cage anyone ever built, exactly what it meant. It meant she is ours. It meant you are standing where you should not stand. It meant put it down. Overseer Vex put it down. He did not decide to. Sesh watched his face as it happened, and there was no decision in it. There was the tidy, resourced, for-program certainty draining out of it all at once. And underneath, the thing that had been underneath the whole time, the frightened cornered animal that every apex creature can smell in every other, and the baton simply came open in his fingers and fell to the loading floor and rang there. And Overseer Vex, director of the Harrow, the man who finished programs other men had failed to finish, took 1 step back from a child humming a lullaby 40 meters above him, and then another, and the ring of station crews stepped back with him, and the auditor from the Corps did not step back. The auditor stood exactly where he was, and looked at the man beside him, with an expression that was the end of a career all by itself. You told the board, the auditor said into the fading bell, that it keyed to affection, that you would flood the window and it would take your handler. His voice was quiet and precise, and it carried in the enormous hush the way the child's had. You stood in the gallery, and you told 11 of us that the child was a mop and a pulse. And you moved the schedule so the doctor could not run her blood. He looked up at the gallery, at the small gray figure at the rail, and then back at Vex, and Sesh saw the thing happen that the whole night had been building toward, the thing the niche of the Harrow itself was built to prevent and had never once managed. The tidy man lost his face completely in front of everyone who had ever feared him, and not to the beast, and not to violence, but to a child's 4-note lullaby and the plain daylight arithmetic of what he'd done. You had the last keeper in the galaxy scrubbing your intake corridor for 7 years, Overseer, and you were going to send her to the lower drum and tell her monster she'd left. I am going to make very certain the Vaught hears all of it, every word. Stand aside from the couriers. Vex did not stand aside. He opened his mouth to recover it, Sesh saw, to find the next thing, the next nothing's broken, the next hold still, and found that there was no next thing, that he had come at last to the end of the tidy arithmetic, to the place where a man discovers that the story is no longer his to tell, and standing in the amber light of his own lockdown with a shock baton at his feet, and the last of the bell dying out of the air, Overseer Vex, for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. Send the pack down, Nell, Sesh said softly. Nobody's going to stop them now. And Nell straightened from the rail and turned to the great gray adult behind her, and put her small hand flat on the seam of its jaw, on the soft place, the way she had 200 times, and said, "Come on. Let's go home, wherever that turns out to be." And she led the last morrec in the galaxy, and its 7 waking children down off the gallery and across the loading floor, through the ring of crew that parted before her without a word, past the auditor who inclined his head, past the fallen baton, past the man who had meant to keep her, toward the flat-nosed hauler and the door off the dead moon. And not one hand in the whole station rose to stop her, because there was not one creature left on Senate who did not finally understand what she was. The conquered picket frigate Cinder came out of its jump 6 hours early, because its adjutant did not like the smell of a black program station going dark, and she had learned in 30 years of picket duty to trust her dislikes. Adjutant Sierra Dawn had burned 2 breaches in her career. She did not think about them often, and she did not apologize for them, because a morrec breach was not a thing you negotiated with. It was a thing you ended from orbit before it reached a shipping lane, and the fact that ending it meant ending everything under it was the cost of the shipping lane, and the Concord had decided that arithmetic long before Dawn was hatched. She came into Senate orbit with the Cinder's forward batteries already warm and a sterilization authorization already countersigned in her own hand, because a dark station on the wrong side of a dead moon that housed an Apex weapons program went dark for exactly one reason, and she intended to be 6 hours ahead of that reason instead of 6 hours behind it. Then the station hailed her, not the director. That was the first wrong note. A junior handler's channel patched crude and fast, and a voice she did not know said, "Cinder, Cinder, this is Harrow Environmental. Do not fire, do not fire. The breach is contained. The breach is contained by the keeper. We are sending you the record. For the love of your own hatchline, look at the record before you burn us." The keeper. Dawn had never heard the word used like that. She held her fire. She was early. She had the margin. And an adjutant who burns a station her orbit hasn't even settled over is an adjutant who eventually burns the wrong one, and she said, "Send your record, Harrow. You have until my orbit closes. Talk fast." They talked fast. Rill did the talking, because Sesh's hands were not steady enough and Nell would not leave the pack and the auditor. It turned out, when the moment came to put his name on a thing that would end the career of everyone above him, discovered in himself the same instinct that had made him abstain from the vote, the instinct to survive by touching nothing. So it was Dr. Rill who sat down at the environmental board with a Concord frigate's guns warming overhead, and told the adjutant of the Cinder the truth, the whole truth, in the flat clinical voice of a woman reading her own indictment. She told her about the compound. She told her about the window and the plan to flood it and the child at the base of the frame. She told her about the panel that had sat unrun in the cold lab behind more important priorities, and she sent, with the telling, the one line of data that mattered, the association trace, the last thing the sensors caught before they failed, the shape of a bond not being written but recognized, blazing up whole, and beside it, at last, the child's blood panel, which Rill had walked to the cold lab and run herself in the 8 minutes it took the Cinder's orbit to close, and which said, in the flat blue certainty of a conquered machine, what Rill had known since the moment the meters went black: keeper line, confirmed. The marker the Concord's own survey teams had catalogued on Asan a generation ago. In the bonded human cast, they had scattered and sold and struck from the record, alive and whole, and 11 years old, and scrubbing an intake corridor on Senate. "You are telling me," Adjutant Dawn said from orbit, and her voice had gone very careful, that the Harrow held a live morrec keeper as unregistered labor for 7 years and did not know it. "I am telling you," Rill said, "that we did not want to know it. There is a difference, Adjutant, and I will not insult a picket officer by pretending otherwise. A keeper made the whole program unnecessary. A keeper meant that 11 years of budget and 4 dead directors and 19 dead handlers had been spent manufacturing a thing that was sitting in the low wing the entire time, for free, because we murdered the people who came with it and could not bear to admit that the murder was the mistake. No one wanted to run the child's blood. I did not want to run the child's blood. So I did not until tonight, when it no longer mattered, when the animal had already told me what the panel would say. She was quiet a moment. Overhead in the dark, a frigate's guns held their warmth, undecided. You have burned breaches before. I can hear it in how you're holding your orbit. So let me tell you what your record does not contain, Adjutant, before you decide whether Senate is a breach. 2 hours ago, the last morrec in the galaxy walked through 6 armed Grut guards in an intake corridor. It did not kill one of them. Its keeper asked it not to, and it did not, because that is what a keeper is, not a leash, not a control signature, not the thing we spent 4 years trying to pour out of a vial. A keeper is the reason an apex weapon chooses mercy. You are holding your guns over the only creatures in this system who spent tonight declining to kill the people who came to kill them. If you burn Senate, Adjutant, you will not be ending a breach. You will be doing the exact thing the Harrow did, one more time at a larger scale with a bigger gun. You will be murdering a keeper and calling it containment. And this time it will be in your own hand, countersigned on the record, and there will be a witness from the Corps standing on the loading floor who watched the whole thing. She did not look at the auditor when she said it, but everyone on the floor did, and the auditor went very still. That is what your record does not contain. Now close your orbit and decide. The channel was silent for a long time. In that silence, Nell stood on the loading floor at the foot of the flat-nosed hauler's ramp, with the adult morrec lying folded and enormous in the hold behind her, and the 7 cubs ranged around her feet, and she looked up through the bay's high viewport at the small hard star that was a frigate deciding whether to burn her, and she was not afraid. Sesh, watching her, marveled at it one last time and then stopped marveling, because he had finally understood where the child's calm came from, and it was not courage exactly, and it was not the pack. It was that Nell Artery had spent her entire life at the mercy of people who might at any moment decide she was not worth the cost of keeping, and she had made her peace with that arithmetic before she was old enough to name it, and so a frigate's guns were not, to her, a new kind of thing. They were only the oldest thing she knew, pointed at her from farther away. "I'd like to talk to her," Nell said. "The one deciding, can she hear me?" "She can hear you," Sesh said, and keyed the channel open. "My name is Nell," the child said up into the dark to the small hard star. "They tell me I'm a keeper. I didn't know that until tonight. Until tonight I thought I was just the one who cleaned the corridor. I don't know very much about what a keeper's supposed to be, or what your Concord's going to want to do with one, and I've had about enough tonight of people deciding what I'm worth without asking me." She put her hand down, and the nearest cub pushed its skull up under it, and the doubled bell stirred, very low, all through the pack. "So I'll just tell you the one thing I know for certain, and then you can decide. These are mine, all 8 of them. Not because I caught them or trained them or bought them. I couldn't do any of those things. I'm 11 and I hold a mop. They're mine because a long time ago somebody's people and somebody's monsters decided to belong to each other, and your Concord killed almost everybody who remembered that, but it didn't kill the notes. My mother hummed 4 notes in the dark, and now I do, and the last of them in the whole galaxy comes when I hum. That's all it is. That's the whole terrible secret 4 directors died looking for. It's a lullaby." Her voice did not rise, but it went up into the frigate's channel clear and final. "You can burn us. He can't stop your guns from up there, and neither can I, but you should know what you'd be burning. You'd be burning the last time this ever gets to happen. There's no more keepers and no more morrec and no more notes, just us on this floor, the very last of a thing your people spent a lot of trouble making sure would never exist again. And here it is anyway, alive anyway, choosing not to hurt anybody anyway." She looked up at the star. "I think that's worth more to you as a thing that exists than a thing you ended. But I've been wrong about what people think I'm worth my whole life. So, your orbit's closed, decide." The bay held its breath. An Adjutant Sira Dalm, 30 years a picket officer, 2 breeches burned and not apologized for, sat in the dim red of the Cinder's command deck with a countersigned sterilization order live under her hand, and looked at the record on her screen. The association trace, the blood panel, the 6 Grut who were still breathing when by every model in her fleet they should not have been. And she thought about the arithmetic the Concord had decided long before she was hatched. The one that said a morrec was a thing you ended before it reached a shipping lane. And she thought, for the first time in 30 years, that the arithmetic had been done by people who had never once had a keeper hum 4 notes up at their guns, and that maybe the arithmetic had always been wrong. And that maybe the wrongness was exactly the thing the Harrow had been built to keep from ever being said out loud. "Harrow," she said, "this is the Cinder. I am standing down my forward batteries." Sesh sat down where he was, on the loading floor all at once, as though something had been cut. "I am logging Senate as a program failure, not a breach," the adjutant went on, and her flat voice did not soften, but it changed, the way a wall changes when a door is cut into it. "I am recording a live keeper line survivor and a bonded clutch, and I am recording that they exercised lethal capability with restraint under provocation twice, which is more than I can say for the last 2 stations I answered a dark signal from." A pause. "And I am recording the name of the program director, and the auditor's testimony, and the doctor's, and I am going to enjoy, in my small way, the very long conversation the Corps is going to have about how 11 years of black budget was spent failing to build a thing that turned out to be scrubbing the intake corridor the whole time." The channel crackled. Adjutant Dahlm to the keeper. "Nell, I am not going to pretend I know what the Concord will decide to do with what you are. That is above a picket officer, and there will be ships and there will be officials and there will be, I am sorry to tell you, a great many people wanting to decide what you're worth. But not tonight, and not with my guns. Tonight you have a fast station and a slow hauler and an 8-tower head start on all of them. I am a picket officer. My orbit is closing again in 90 minutes and I do not, as it happens, intend to be looking very hard at the small craft bay when it does." Another pause and something almost like warmth, buried deep and clinical. "Go home, keeper. Wherever that turns out to be. Cinder out." The channel closed. For a moment no one on the loading floor moved. Then the auditor from the Corps turned to Overseer Vex, who had stood through all of it at the center of the floor, silent, forgotten, his baton still at his feet, the tidy arithmetic that had carried him through 4 programs finally and completely spent, and said, in his precise carrying voice, the sentence that would follow the man to whatever quiet posting the Concord eventually buried him in. "You had her for 7 years, Overseer, and you gave her a coverall that fit on the last morning, so she'd be soft. That is the only thing you ever got right about her, and you got it right for the wrong reason. Sit down and be quiet. The Corps will send for you." And Overseer Vex, director of the Harrow, the man who finished programs, sat down on the loading floor of his own station among the crew who had feared him, and was quiet, and no one looked at him again, which was, for a man like Vex, the entire punishment, not the tribunal that would come, not the buried posting, but this, the loading floor, the child walking past him without a glance, the last of the bell fading in a bay that had, for 11 years, been his. The flat-nosed hauler was called the dross runner, which was a name for a boat that hauls the ore too poor to bother assaying, and it had never in its working life carried anything worth a second look, and Sesh thought, running the launch sequence with hands that had finally stopped shaking, that it was about to carry the most valuable cargo in the galaxy off a dead moon, while a conquered frigate looked politely the other way, and that there was a kind of justice in the poorest boat on the station getting to be the one. "You don't have to come," Nell said to him from the ramp. Sesh looked up from the pilot's board. The adult morrec was down in the hold, folded into a space that had been built for low-grade core samples, its plated bulk filling it wall to wall, and the 7 cubs were arranged over and around it and over and around the child, and the whole hold made, very low, the contented idling bell of a pack that has, against all the arithmetic of the galaxy, ended a night with everyone it loves still breathing. And here at the top of the ramp was the child, offering him, the way she offered the guards their mercy and the frigate its choice, a door out of a thing he had already walked into. "There's no berth for me here after tonight," Sesh said. "You know that. I stopped the flood and I opened the clutch and I patched a channel to a frigate to keep it from burning the overseer's station. The Corps doesn't forget a handler who does that. There's no posting anywhere in conquered space with my name still clean on it." "That's a reason you can't stay," Nell said. "It's not a reason you have to come with us. You could go anywhere. You don't have to spend the rest of your life on a poor boat with 8 monsters and me." Sesh considered the child in the hatchway and the pack behind her, and the 9 years he had spent on a dead moon telling himself he would not stay, and he understood, at last, what the whole night had been trying to teach him, which was that he had been wrong about what he was staying for the entire time. "When you were small," he said, "and the clerk kept forgetting your name on the ration roster, somebody used to bring you the bars." "I know," Nell said. "The tired one." "Nobody told me to," Sesh said. "It wasn't a duty. There was no line item for it. I did it because a station on the wrong side of a dead moon had absorbed a laborer's orphan the way it absorbed everything, and put a mop in her hands and forgotten to feed her, and I was too tired to fix any of that, but I could carry a ration bar down a corridor, so I did." He turned back to the launch board because he did not entirely trust his own face. "That's the whole of it, Nell. That's the only clean thing I ever did in 9 years at the Harrow, and it turns out it was the only thing worth doing, and I'd like to keep doing it. Whatever's next, wherever the boat goes, I'd like to be the one who brings the bars." He keyed the last of the sequence. Under them the dross runner woke and shuddered and began, for the first time in its life, to matter. "So no, there's no berth for me here, but I'm not looking for one here. I'm looking for one there with you, and I'm asking to come. That's different from having to." Nell looked at him for a long moment, the flat, careful, low-wing face she used with handlers, the one that gave nothing back, and then it broke, all at once, into something Sesh had never once seen on it in 7 years, which was the face of a child who has just been given a thing she did not think to ask for because she had never in her life had reason to believe it was available. "Bring the bars," she said. "Come on." They left Dr. Rill on the loading floor because she chose it. "Somebody has to still be standing here when the officials come," she told Sesh at the foot of the ramp in the last minutes. "Somebody with the data and the standing and the willingness to say it in a room. The auditor will save himself. That's what auditors are for. Vex will drown. But the record of what a keeper is, what really happened on this floor tonight, why the compound did what it did, why the arithmetic was always wrong, that needs a witness who can survive the telling of it, and that is me, whether I have earned the right to it or not." Her ashen scientist's face was very still. "I designed the thing that was meant to steal her, Sesh. Let me be the thing that makes sure the galaxy has to write down, in its own official hand, that it couldn't. That the last keeper walked out of the Harrow with her whole pack, because the bond we spent a decade trying to manufacture turned out to be the one thing in creation you cannot take by force. Let me put that on the record where they can't bury it. It's the only apology I have that's worth anything." "They'll ruin you for it," Sesh said. "They'll try," said Dr. Rill. "I've spent 11 years being ruined slowly in the direction they chose. I find I would rather be ruined quickly in a direction I chose. Go, your window's closing." And Sesh, she stopped him, one hand raised, and for the first and last time in 9 years the cold clinical armor came all the way off, and underneath was only a tired person who had, at the very end, on the very last night, gotten one thing right. "When you tell it, however you tell it, use the child's word for the sound, not my word, not the frame's word, hers." A faint, exhausted, almost smile. "She called it the bell. It should go into the record as the bell." And so it did. The dross runner lifted off Senate at the 8th hour and was 3 jumps gone before the officials, the adjutant had promised, ever reached the dead moon. And by then the story was already out ahead of it. Running the frontier the way a fire runs a dry gantry. because a thing like that cannot be kept in a drum on the wrong side of anywhere. It came apart and back together in the telling, the way such stories do. On some stations they had the child older, or the beast bigger, or the number of cubs wrong. On some they had a whole rebellion, a station stormed, 100 morrec loosed, the truth being always too small and too strange for the frontier's appetite, which wanted armies and got, instead, a laborer's orphan with a mop and a lullaby. But the center of it held, on every telling, the way the true thing at the center of a story holds even when the edges go to legend. That the conquered had spent 11 years and 4 directors, and a fortune trying to build, in a vial, the loyalty of a war beast, and that a human child had been carrying it in her blood the entire time and had not known, and that when they finally injected the last of the murdered kind with the compound that was supposed to make it theirs, it had reached past all of them and found her, because you cannot write your name on a wall that already has a name, and the name had been hers all along. And the sound the pack made on the loading floor, the doubled bell, the layered lineage note, the vast low answer to the keeper's 4 hummed notes that had put a frigate's guns to sleep, that got a name too in the telling, because the frontier gives names to the things it means to keep. They called it the keeper's bell. It became, over the years that followed, a real thing, a said thing, a thing with weight. Handlers used it, on the stations where beasts were still kept, though fewer and fewer stations kept beasts after the Harrow, because the Harrow's story made the whole enterprise look like what it had always been. Old crews used it, the human families in the lower drums of 100 conquered stations, who heard in it something about themselves they had not been allowed to say out loud. That the thing you scatter and sell cheap and strike from the record does not stop being what it is. That a mop in the hand does not unmake a keeper in the blood. That somewhere, on some poor boat, one of theirs had walked off a dead moon with an army at her back because her mother had hummed 4 notes in the dark. When a low-winged child on some far station did a small brave thing, or held still under a hard hand, or spoke plain truth up at people who outranked her, the old ones would say she has the keeper's bell in her, and mean by it the whole of what Nell Artery had been. Small and overlooked, and stronger than everything built to break her, and loved by a thing the galaxy had tried and failed to make into a weapon. The conquered never did decide what to do with the last keeper. That was the quiet joke of it, the one Sesh savored longest. There were ships, as the adjutant had promised, and officials, and long, careful transmissions to the frontier from important people who wanted to negotiate, to register, to relocate, to study, to own. But you cannot summon a keeper. You cannot subpoena a pack. The Dross Runner was a poor boat and the frontier was very large, and a keeper who does not wish to be found is not found, and 8 morrec are a persuasive argument for leaving a poor boat alone, and so the official transmissions grew fewer, and then rare, and then stopped, and the last keeper in the galaxy passed, in the Conquered's records, from an asset to be recovered into a rumor to be denied, which was exactly where Nell Artery wished to be. The world they came to at last had no name on any Conquered chart, because the Conquered had never found it worth the shipping. It was a wet green place, 3 jumps past the edge of anywhere, with a heavy sky and long slow rivers and a smell. Sesh noticed it the first time the Dross Runner's ramp came down, a smell that made the adult morrec go very still at the foot of the ramp and lift its great blunt head and make a sound none of them had heard it make before, low and long and without any grief in it at all. Asun was gone. The Conquered had made very sure Asun was gone. But the galaxy is wide, and green wet worlds are not so rare as murdered ones, and this was not Asun. But it was enough like Asun that a thing bred for a wet green world knew, in its marrow, that it had come somewhere it could set the last of the stone down. They stayed. Sesh grew old there, which he had not expected to do anywhere, and certainly not somewhere green. He built over the years the things a settlement needs, and learned the long rivers, and kept, out of 9 years of habit he never quite shook, a careful record of the pack, though the record changed its character over time from a handler's log into something more like the notes of an uncle who cannot quite believe his luck. Because the cubs grew. That was the part the frontier's tellings never got, because the frontier likes its cubs to stay cubs, small and soft forever, and these did not. They grew the way morrec grow on a world that suits them, which is enormously and without hurry, and past every mark the harrow's cold cylinders had ever recorded, because the harrow had only ever measured young things held asleep. By the time the settlement had its third harvest, the 7 cubs that had piled onto a child on a freezer floor stood taller at the shoulder than their own vast parent. 7 grown morrec ranging the long green riverlands, and the adult gray, who was always gray, who would be gray until the last of them was gone, grew gray in truth as the years went on, grayer at the muzzle, slower at the rise. Content to lie in the sun at the settlement's heart, while the great grown children he had endured 11 years of the frame to keep alive, ranged out and came back, always came back, to the one small figure at the center of the pack who was not small anymore either. Nell grew up, keepers do. She was not a child by the 3rd harvest, and not a girl by the 10th, and the frontier that told and retold the story of the mop, and the lullaby would not, Sesh often thought, have recognized the woman the child became, tall, and weathered by the heavy green sky, and quiet still, always quiet, with the flat, careful stillness of someone who had learned very young to give a hard room nothing back, and had never entirely unlearned it. But she hummed in the evenings 4 low notes at the settlement's heart, her mother's 4 notes, the ones neither of them had ever known were anything, and when she did, 7 grown morrec and 1 graying one lifted them off her breath and gave them back, the doubled bell, the keeper's bell, rolling out over the long green riverlands of a world with no name, and every creature that heard it understood in the place older than language exactly what it meant. It meant she is ours. It meant nothing comes through us to reach her. It meant the dark is over and it stays over because we say so, and we are the last of a thing that could not be broken, and we chose her, and we would choose her again. There is a cadet on a station 3 jumps from anywhere who does not know she is going to hear this story tonight. She is small for her intake and plain and overlooked, and she cleans a corridor for her keep because the machines are dear and a cadet on a scholarship is not, and the others in her intake do not see her, which is the way she prefers it because she learned very young that getting seen is how you get sent. She has never met a beast. She has never left the station. She thinks tonight, sweeping the long gray throat of a corridor that smells of solvent, that she is the least important person on the wrong side of a dead moon, and that no one will ever come, and that this is simply what she is worth. And then an old handler with a cracked mandible, retired to the station's quiet levels, too old now for the long green riverlands but full of them, will stop at the mouth of her corridor the way he once stopped at the mouth of another, and he will look at the small overlooked child with the mop in her hands, and he will recognize the thing he recognized once before, a very long time ago, on the worst and best night of his life. The stillness, the careful flat face, the plain, unremarkable ordinariness that the whole galaxy walks past, and that is, he alone in this corridor knows, exactly the shape the most important thing in creation comes in. You've got the look of someone who's never been told a story worth the telling, he will say. Set the mop down a minute. I knew a girl once who cleaned a corridor like this one, on a moon like this one, and I want to tell you what she turned out to be. It starts with a war beast in a frame, and a compound that was supposed to make it into a weapon, and a child everybody thought was a mop and a pulse. He will lower himself down onto an upturned pail, the way old handlers do, and his cracked mandible will click, and his eyes will go to the far dark end of the corridor as though he can see, past 3 jumps and a dozen years, a wet green world and a graying beast in the sun. And it ends with a lullaby, 4 notes, her mother's 4 notes. He will smile. You'll want to hear how it ends, I think. You look like someone who could use knowing how it ends. And the child will set the mop down. And somewhere 3 jumps past the edge of anywhere, on a world with no name, in the long blue evening, a woman who was once a laborer's orphan will hum 4 low notes into the dark, and the last of a murdered kind will answer her, all of them at once, the keeper's bell rolling out whole and unbroken over the green. And it will carry, though it cannot, though there is no science in any species to explain it, across all that black and empty distance. To a small overlooked child on a station on the wrong side of a dead moon, who does not know it yet, who is only just now setting down her mop to listen, but who has, though no one has ever told her, though the galaxy has walked past her every single day of her life, the whole of it already waiting in her blood. The bell, come here. You were never nobody. You were only ever the keeper, and the dark is over, and we have been waiting for you the entire time. Come home,